Eliza Boone had just slapped a man twice her size in front of half the town, and she wasn't sorry. Not one bit. Behind her lay a trail of blood and lies, a powerful man's obsession, the law twisted into a noose, and a truth no one wanted to hear. Ahead stood a stranger with winter in his eyes, offering marriage as cold as a business deal and a mountain that might swallow her whole. Stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The frontier town of Steep Ridge wasn't much to look at. A collection of weathered buildings clinging to the edge of civilization like barnacles on a rotting ship. Eliza Boone stepped off the stagecoach into ankle-deep mud, her worn traveling dress already heavy with the dust of 3 states. The hem dragged through the muck as she steadied herself against the coach wheel, trying not to let anyone see how badly her legs were shaking. She'd been traveling for 11 days straight. The driver tossed her single carpet bag down without ceremony. It landed with a wet thud that sent brown water splashing across her boots, boots that had been nice once, before she'd walked through half of Kansas in them. "End of the line, ma'am." The driver didn't look at her when he spoke. Nobody had looked at her directly since St. Louis. A woman traveling alone was either desperate or damaged, and either way, folks preferred not to know which. Eliza picked up her bag and took in the street. 2 saloons facing each other like prize fighters. A general store with windows so dirty you couldn't see what they were selling. A hotel that might have been painted once, before the wind stripped it down to gray wood. And everywhere, men. Men loading wagons, men on horseback, men standing in doorways with nothing better to do than watch a strange woman arrive. She'd known it would be like this. Rowan Hale had been clear in his letters, 3 of them, each one shorter than the last. "I need a wife. You need a situation. The mountain is hard. Most women don't last. If you're coming, come. If not, don't waste the stamp." Romance hadn't even pretended to be part of the deal. Eliza started walking toward the hotel, where Rowan had said to wait. Her stomach twisted with hunger she'd been ignoring for 2 days, since the last of her money had gone to the stagecoach fare. The bag weighed almost nothing, 1 change of clothes, her mother's hairbrush, and a leather envelope she kept pressed against her body even when she slept. Evidence. The kind that could hang a man if anyone would listen to a woman doing the telling. She was halfway across the street when she heard the laughter. It started low, from a cluster of men outside the saloon. Then it spread, rolling down the street like spilled whiskey. Eliza kept her eyes forward, kept walking. She'd learned that much in the past 6 months. Keep moving, don't engage, don't give them anything to grab onto. "Hey now, looks like Hale's mail order finally showed up." The voice was loud, meant to carry, meant to humiliate. Eliza's jaw tightened, but she didn't stop. Mountain must be real lonely if he's ordering that. More laughter. Boots on wood as men stepped off the saloon porch to get a better look. Eliza felt their eyes crawling over her like ants on spilled sugar. Her dress was stained from travel, her hair coming loose from its pins, her face probably showing every one of her 26 years, plus a few extra from the road. She was 10 feet from the hotel steps when one of them moved to block her path. He was big, the kind of big that came from lifting heavy things and eating well. Clean shirt, good boots, a belt buckle that probably cost more than everything Eliza owned. His face was red from drink or sun or both, and his smile showed too many teeth. "Hold on there, sweetheart. Where are you rushing off to?" Eliza stopped because she had to. "Excuse me." Awful unfriendly. He turned to his friends, playing to his audience. "Hale's got himself a prissy one. Wonder how long before she's running back down that mountain, crying about broke nails and bear scat." The men laughed harder. Eliza tried to step around him, but he moved with her, still smiling. "I'm talking to you, honey. It's rude not to answer when a man's being friendly." "You're blocking my way." "Well now, maybe I'm just trying to do you a favor. See, I know Rowan Hale. Known him for years, and I'm thinking a woman like you—" His eyes dragged over her in a way that made her skin want to crawl off her bones. "You might want to reconsider this whole arrangement. Man like that, living up there all alone, he's got particular needs. Might be rough for a delicate lady." Something in Eliza's chest went very quiet and very still. She'd spent 6 months running. 6 months looking over her shoulder, jumping at shadows, sleeping in barns and paying for rides with the last of her jewelry. 6 months being afraid, being small, being invisible. And she was so goddamn tired of it. "Move," she said. His smile widened. Or what? Eliza set down her carpet bag. She looked at this man, the stranger who thought he had the right to her time, her attention, her fear, and something inside her that had been coiled tight for half a year finally snapped. She hit him. Not a slap, though that's what people would call it later. A real hit, with her palm flat and her shoulder behind it, the way her brother had taught her before the fever took him. The sound cracked through the street like a whip, and the man's head snapped sideways hard enough that he staggered. The laughter died instantly. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. The man's hand went to his face, touching the red mark blooming across his cheek. His eyes went wide, then narrow, then mean. "You bitch!" I said move. Eliza's voice didn't shake. Her hands did. God, they were shaking so hard. But her voice came out level and cold. She picked up her bag and waited. The man looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time, like she'd suddenly become real instead of just something to poke at for entertainment. His friends had gone quiet too, watching, waiting to see what he'd do. He could hit her back. Part of Eliza expected it, was braced for it. But there were too many witnesses, and even in a place like Steep Ridge, hitting a woman in broad daylight had consequences. "Crazy bitch," he muttered, but he stepped aside. Eliza walked past him. Her legs felt like water. Her heart was trying to punch through her ribs. But she walked steady, head up, straight to the hotel steps. That's when she saw him. Rowan Hale was leaning against the hotel's porch rail like he'd been there the whole time. He was tall, taller than she'd expected, though his letters had mentioned it. Lean in the way men get when they do hard work and don't eat fancy. His clothes were clean but worn, his boots scuffed to gray. He had dark hair that needed cutting and a face that gave away absolutely nothing. He was watching her with eyes the color of winter sky. Eliza stopped at the bottom of the steps. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. She tried to read something in his expression, approval, disgust, amusement, anything, but his face was stone. Finally, he pushed off the rail and came down the steps. Up close, he smelled like pine and wood smoke. He had a scar through his left eyebrow and calluses on his hands that she could see from 3 feet away. Eliza Boone. There wasn't a question. "Mr. Hale." He glanced past her at the men still standing outside the saloon, then back at her. His eyes dropped to her right hand, which was probably already starting to bruise. "You always greet strangers like that?" "Only the rude ones." Something flickered across his face, so quick she almost missed it. Might have been amusement, might have been indigestion. With a face like that, it was hard to tell. "You hungry?" Eliza's stomach answered before she could, growling loud enough that his eyebrow, the one without the scar, went up slightly. "I'll take that as a yes." He started walking, not checking to see if she'd follow. "We leave at dawn. There's things you'll need. Can't get them on the mountain." Eliza grabbed her bag and hurried after him. Her hand throbbed where she'd hit that man, and she could feel the whole town watching her back, but she kept her head up. She'd come too far to start shrinking now. The general store was cramped and dim, smelling of leather and tobacco, and something sweet going bad in the back. The proprietor, a thin man with spectacles that kept sliding down his nose, looked up when they entered, saw Rowan, and immediately straightened. "Mr. Hale, didn't expect to see you down until spring. Need supplies?" Rowan moved through the narrow aisles with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where everything was. "Winter gear. Women's." The proprietor's eyes slid to Eliza, lingering just long enough to make her uncomfortable. "Heard you sent for a wife. Congratulations." Rowan didn't respond to that. He was already pulling items off shelves, heavy wool socks, flannel shirts, long underwear thick enough to stand on its own. He held up a pair of men's work pants, eyeing Eliza's height, then tossed them on the growing pile. "I can pay for—" Eliza started. "No, you can't." Rowan didn't look at her. "I know what the stage costs from St. Louis. You're broke." Heat rushed to her face. It was true, but hearing it said out loud made her want to hit him too. Instead, she bit the inside of her cheek and stayed quiet. Rowan added boots to the pile. Real boots, with thick soles and good laces. Then a coat lined with fur that looked like it cost more than Eliza had made in a year of sewing. Gloves, a hat, a scarf that was more like a small blanket. "She gonna need all that?" the proprietor asked. "If she wants to live, yeah." The casual way he said it made Eliza's skin prickle. She'd known the mountain was remote, known it was hard. But the way Rowan was outfitting her, like she was heading into battle, made her wonder exactly what she'd agreed to. While Rowan settled the bill, Eliza wandered to the back of the store. There was a small mirror hanging between shelves, and she caught sight of herself for the first time in days. She looked like hell. Her dark hair, usually pinned neat, was escaping in tangled strands. Her face was gaunt, cheekbones too sharp, shadows under eyes that seemed too big for her head. The green dress she'd thought looked respectable when she left St. Louis was now a map of hard travel, stains on the bodice, mud on the hem, a tear in the sleeve she'd tried to mend with thread that didn't match. No wonder that man had laughed. Behind her reflection, she could see Rowan talking to the proprietor in low tones, counting out money from a worn leather purse. His face was still unreadable, but there was something in the set of his shoulders, tension, maybe, or resignation. What had he expected when he sent those letters? Someone prettier? Someone younger? Someone who didn't show up looking like 3 miles of bad road and immediately start hitting people? Ready? Eliza turned. Rowan had bundled everything into a pack that looked heavy enough to break a normal person's back. He carried it like it weighed nothing. There's a boarding house 3 doors down. Woman who runs it is mean, but she's clean. Get yourself a room, a bath, and a meal. We leave at first light. He was already heading for the door. Mr. Hale? He stopped, glanced back. Eliza wanted to say thank you, but the words stuck in her throat. This wasn't charity. This was investment. He was buying supplies for a business arrangement, nothing more. What happened back there? She said instead. With that man. I didn't mean to cause trouble. Rowan's expression didn't change. That was Cal Brennan. He causes his own trouble just fine without help. He shifted the pack on his shoulder. But if you're planning to make a habit of hitting folks, you should learn to do it right. That slap probably hurt you more than it hurt him. Then he was gone, leaving Eliza standing in the doorway with her carpet bag and a hand that was definitely starting to swell. The boarding house was exactly as advertised, clean and run by a woman whose face looked like she'd been sucking lemons for 40 years straight. She took Eliza's last dollar for the room, bath, and supper without comment, just pointed upstairs and said, "Bath's in the back. Don't use all the hot water." The room was small, a bed, a chair, a washstand with a cracked basin, but it had a lock on the door and a window that looked out over the street instead of an alley, and after weeks of sleeping in stagecoaches and haylofts, it felt like luxury. Eliza set down her bag and immediately checked the leather envelope. Still there, still sealed with wax that bore the mark of a man who thought himself untouchable. Victor Drax. Just thinking his name made her hands shake. She forced herself to breathe slowly, counting to 10 like her mother used to make her do when she was angry as a child. Drax wasn't here. Couldn't be here. She'd covered her tracks too well, changed coaches 3 times, paid cash for everything, used her mother's maiden name on the passenger manifests. And even if he somehow found out she'd come west, there were 1,000 frontier towns, 10,000 mountains. She was safe. She had to be. The bath was a tin tub in a room that smelled of lye soap and wet wood. The water was barely warm, but Eliza sank into it anyway, watching dirt and dust swirl away from her skin. She scrubbed until her arms ached, trying to wash off not just the grime of travel, but the feeling of Cal Brennan's eyes on her, the weight of the whole town's judgment. When she finally climbed out, her skin was pink and raw, but she felt closer to human. Supper was served in a common room downstairs, beef stew that was more potatoes than meat, bread that was yesterday's, coffee that tasted like it had been made last week. Eliza ate every bite and soaked up the gravy with the bread, not caring that the other boarders were staring. Let them stare. She'd learned something today, hitting Cal Brennan in front of everyone. She'd learned that she still had some fight left in her, that she hadn't been completely hollowed out by fear and running. She'd need that fight tomorrow. Back in her room, Eliza laid out her new supplies. The boots were stiff, would need breaking in. The coat was heavy, smelling of lanolin and animal musk. She tried on the men's work pants. They were too big in the waist, too long in the leg, but they'd be warmer than any skirt, and she could take them in with the sewing kit she'd bought with her last coins. She should sleep. Dawn was coming fast, and Rowan had made it clear he wouldn't wait. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw Drax's face, heard his voice, smooth as oil, making promises that sounded like threats. You belong to me, Eliza. You always have. And I always collect what's mine. She sat up, breathing hard, and lit the candle by her bed. The shadows jumped across the walls like living things. Outside, the street was finally quiet, just the sound of wind pushing between buildings. Eliza pulled out the leather envelope and opened it carefully. Inside were 3 documents: a contract with Drax's signature, a ledger showing payments to judges and lawmen, and a letter in his own hand detailing plans that would ruin more than just Eliza if they came to light. She'd stolen them the night she ran, walked right into his study while he was entertaining guests downstairs, picked his desk lock with a hairpin, and took the 3 things that proved what he really was under all that charm and money. He'd kill her for it. Would have killed her already if she'd stayed, but she hadn't stayed. She'd run and kept running until she'd seen Rowan Hale's advertisement in a St. Louis newspaper. Man seeking wife. Must be strong, practical, not afraid of hard work or isolation. No delicate flowers, no quitters. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't even particularly appealing. But it was far away from Victor Drax, far away from St. Louis society, and paid off sheriffs and judges who wouldn't hear a woman's testimony against a man with money. It was a chance. Eliza sealed the envelope again and tucked it back into her bag, under the false bottom she'd sewn in. Then she blew out the candle and lay down in the darkness. Tomorrow, she'd climb a mountain with a stranger. But tonight, for the first time in 6 months, she wasn't running. She was choosing to go up instead of just away, choosing to face something hard instead of just hiding from something worse. It wasn't much, but it was hers. Dawn came cold and gray, leaking through the window like dirty water. Eliza was already dressed, new pants rolled at the ankles, 2 pairs of socks, flannel shirt under her old dress because the heavy coat was too much for walking through town. She'd braided her hair tight and pinned it close to her head, the way she'd worn it when she worked in the textile mill before Drax decided she'd look better on his arm than behind a loom. Rowan was waiting outside with 2 horses, both loaded with supplies. He looked her over once, nodded at the boots, and handed her the reins of the smaller horse. "You ride?" "Not well." "You'll learn." He swung up onto his own horse with easy grace. "We've got 6 miles of trail, then we start climbing. Stay close. The path's narrow in places." They rode out of Steep Ridge as the town was waking up. A few early risers watched them go. Shopkeepers sweeping stoops, a prostitute heading home from the saloon, an old man feeding chickens in a yard that was more mud than grass. Eliza didn't look back. The trail started easy, winding through scrub pine and rocky soil. The morning was crisp, the kind of cold that bit at exposed skin, but felt clean after the stale air of the boarding house. Eliza's horse plodded along behind Rowan's, content to follow. They rode in silence for over an hour before Rowan spoke. "That envelope you keep touching, what's in it?" Eliza's hand froze halfway to her bag. She'd been checking it without thinking, making sure it was still there. Old habit. "Papers. Must be important papers." "They are." Rowan glanced back at her. "You running from the law?" "No." "Running from a man?" Eliza's jaw tightened. "Does it matter?" He faced forward again, and for a while there was just the sound of hooves on stone and leather creaking. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful. "Only matters if he's the kind to follow. I don't want trouble on my mountain." "He won't follow," Eliza tried to sound certain. "He doesn't know where I went. Men like that usually find out." "How do you know what kind of man he is?" "I haven't told you anything." Rowan's shoulders lifted in something that might have been a shrug. "Woman doesn't travel 1,000 miles to marry a stranger unless something's chasing her. And you've got that look." "What look?" "Like you're always checking exits." Eliza felt her face get hot. She wanted to deny it, but he was right. Even now, riding through empty wilderness, part of her was mapping the terrain, noting places to hide, calculating how fast she could run if she had to. "The papers," she said finally, "they're evidence, proof of things he did, things that would destroy him if they came out. So why not turn them in? Go to the law." Eliza laughed, and it came out bitter. "He is the law, or owns enough of it that it makes no difference." Rowan was quiet for a long time. Then, "What's his name?" "Why?" "So I know who to shoot if he shows up." He said it so casually, like he was talking about the weather. Eliza stared at his back, trying to figure out if he was joking. His shoulders were relaxed, his hands easy on the reins. Nothing about him suggested he was making a dramatic gesture or trying to impress her. He just meant it. "Victor Drax," she said quietly. "His name is Victor Drax." If Rowan recognized the name, he didn't show it. He just nodded once and kept riding. The trail got steeper. The horses started working harder, their breath coming in visible puffs. Trees grew thicker here, pine and aspen crowding close. Eliza's thighs were starting to ache from gripping the saddle, and her hands were cold despite the gloves. Around mid-morning, Rowan stopped at a stream to let the horses drink. Eliza climbed down gratefully, her legs wobbling. Everything hurt. Muscles she didn't know she had were announcing their existence with sharp complaints. Rowan pulled jerky and hard bread from his saddlebag and handed her half. They ate standing up, watching the water run clear over smooth stones. "It gets harder from here," Rowan said. "Trail's too narrow for horses in some places. We'll be leading them." Eliza looked at the mountain rising ahead of them, its peak still hidden in morning clouds. "How much harder?" "Depends on how tough you are." It wasn't said meanly, just fact. Eliza took another bite of jerky, tough as boot leather and twice as salty, and swallowed her pride with it. "I'm tougher than I look." "Good." Rowan finished his bread in 2 bites. "Because you look half dead already." That stung, even though it was probably true. Eliza wanted to snap back at him, but before she could, he continued. "But you hit Cal Brennan in front of everyone, didn't run when he looked ready to hit back, and you've been on that horse for 3 hours without complaining once." He gathered up his reins. "So maybe you'll make it after all." It was the closest thing to a compliment she'd gotten from him. Eliza found herself standing a little straighter. The afternoon proved Rowan right about everything getting harder. The trail turned into a narrow path carved along the mountainside, with rock wall on one side and nothing but air on the other. Eliza had to lead her horse carefully, talking to it in low tones when it balked at tight corners. Her lungs started to burn. The air was thinner here, each breath not quite enough. Her legs shook with every step. Sweat ran down her back despite the cold, and the pack Rowan had given her felt like it was full of stones. She didn't complain, partly because she was too stubborn, partly because she didn't have the breath for it, but mostly because Rowan never looked back, never checked on her, never asked if she needed to rest. He just kept climbing with steady, relentless patience, trusting her to keep up or fall behind. And Eliza had spent too much of her life falling behind. When the sun started dropping toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Rowan finally stopped. They were on a small plateau sheltered on 3 sides by rock. A fire ring made of stones sat in the center, black with old ash. "We camp here tonight. Home's another 4 hours up, and I don't travel that path in the dark." Eliza collapsed onto a rock and tried not to look as destroyed as she felt. Her hands were shaking, her legs felt like wet rope. When she took off her new boots, her feet were covered in blisters that had burst and reformed. Rowan saw them, said nothing, and started building a fire. He moved with efficiency that came from doing something 10,000 times, gathering kindling, arranging stones, coaxing flame from flint and steel. Within minutes, fire was crackling, throwing warm light across their little camp. Eliza watched him work. His hands were scarred, old burns, cuts that had healed crooked, calluses thick as boot leather. His face, lit by firelight, looked harder than it had in town. Older. There were lines around his eyes and mouth that suggested he'd done a lot more frowning than smiling in his life. What had made him put that advertisement in the paper? What kind of loneliness drove a man to order a wife like she was farm equipment? Why me? The question came out before she could stop it. Rowan glanced up from the fire. "What?" "I saw your advertisement in St. Louis. You must have put it in other papers, too." "Must have gotten other responses." Eliza pulled her coat tighter. Women who were prettier, younger, not running from anything. Rowan considered this while he hung a pot of water over the fire to boil. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured. "Got 43 letters total. 15 were from women too old or sick to make the climb. 10 were from girls so young their fathers would have hunted me down if I'd answered. 8 were from women looking for romance and adventure." He snorted. "Mountains got no romance, and the only adventure is not dying. That left 10. He pulled out coffee grounds and started measuring them into the pot. Of those 10 3-cent pictures of women who definitely weren't them, 4 had handwriting so bad I couldn't read half of what they wrote. Two wanted me to come get them instead of meeting me in town. He looked at her directly. You were the only one who wrote 3 sentences and meant every word. I need a situation. I can work. I don't quit. Eliza remembered writing that letter. Remembered sitting in a St. Louis boarding house with her last $quarter, a stolen envelope of evidence, and no plan beyond a way. She'd kept it short because she couldn't afford the postage for anything longer. That's it, she said. 3 sentences? That's all I needed. Rowan poured coffee into tin cups and handed her one. It was bitter and strong enough to strip paint. Pretty fades. Young gets old. Romance dies when you're hauling water in a blizzard. But work ethic? That lasts. He said it without poetry, without trying to make it sound better than it was. And somehow that made it feel more honest than any flowery speech. They ate a cold supper, more jerky, some cheese that was starting to sweat, the last of the bread. Eliza forced it down even though her stomach was twisted into knots. Her body needed fuel for tomorrow, for the final climb that Rowan said would make today look easy. Tell me about the mountain, she said. About where we're going. Rowan stared into the fire. Cabin small, 1 room. I built it myself 5 years back after... He stopped, jaw working like he was chewing on words he didn't want to say. After I decided I was done with people. It's solid, warm enough. There's a spring 50 yards from the door, good clean water year-round. Hunting's decent, deer, elk if you're lucky, rabbits and birds if you're not. What about other people? Neighbors? Nearest homestead is 12 miles north, and they're only there in summer. I see them maybe twice a year. He refilled his coffee cup. Town's a day's ride down when the weather's good. 2 or 3 days when it's not. Winter storms can lock you up there for weeks at a time. Eliza tried to imagine it. Weeks alone with this quiet, scarred stranger in a 1-room cabin while snow piled up outside. It should have terrified her. Maybe it would have if she hadn't just spent 6 months being terrified of something worse. You ever get lonely? She asked. Rowan's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Lonely's better than the alternative. There was a story there. Eliza could feel it, heavy in the air between them like smoke. But she didn't push. She had her own stories she wasn't ready to tell. They finished their coffee in silence. When the fire burned down to coals, Rowan showed her how to make a bedroll. Blankets layered just so, positioned near the fire, but not too near. He took the first watch, sitting with his rifle across his knees, staring out into the darkness beyond their little circle of light. Eliza lay down and tried to sleep, but her body was too sore, her mind too full. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Victor Drax's face, heard his voice making promises that were really threats. You can run, Eliza, but you can't hide. Not from me. She must have made a sound because Rowan glanced over. Bad dreams? Haven't slept yet. He was quiet for a moment. Then, the man you're running from, Drax. He hurt you? Eliza's throat went tight. Not the way you're thinking. What way then? She sat up, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. Out in the darkness, something moved, probably just wind in the trees, but it made her heart race anyway. He owned the textile mill where I worked, saw me one day and decided I'd make a fine addition to his collection. The words tasted bitter. Started small, extra pay, easier shifts, gifts I didn't want. Then bigger things, a house, dresses, jewelry. Told everyone I was his fiancée, even though I never said yes. You could have said no. I did. Eliza's hands clenched in the blanket. He bought the building where I rented a room, bought the store where I got my food, bought my friends' debts and called them due. Every door I tried to walk through, he was already there, holding it shut unless I went through his instead. Rowan's face was unreadable in the low light, but he was listening. Then I found those papers, learned he was paying off judges to rule in his favor, bribing lawmen to look the other way when his business partners disappeared, forging documents to steal land from people who couldn't fight back. He wasn't just trapping me, he was destroying anyone who got in his way. So you stole proof and ran. So I stole proof and ran, Eliza confirmed, because staying meant becoming his property, and running meant maybe dying free. The fire popped, sending sparks spiraling into the night sky. Rowan watched them rise and fade. You know he'll come looking, he said finally. Man like that, with that much to lose if those papers come out, he won't stop. I know. And you're betting that a mountain and a stranger will be enough to keep you safe. Eliza met his eyes across the fire. I'm betting that being somewhere he can't reach is better than being somewhere he already owns. And if he does come... She touched the leather envelope through her dress. These papers will bury him. They just need someone willing to listen. A lot of faith to put in, maybe. Maybe's all I've got. Rowan nodded slowly, like she'd just confirmed something he'd already suspected. He stood, stretched, and handed her the rifle. Your watch. Wake me if you hear anything bigger than a rabbit. He lay down and was asleep within minutes, breathing deep and even. Eliza held the rifle, heavier than she'd expected, cold metal warming slowly against her palms, and kept watch over a man she barely knew while the mountain darkness pressed close around them. Tomorrow, she'd climb higher still. Tomorrow, she'd see the place that might become her home or her grave. But tonight, she was alive, armed, and finally, making her own choices, even if those choices scared her half to death. Dawn came too early and too cold. Eliza woke to Rowan shaking her shoulder, the sky still more black than blue. Her whole body screamed protest when she tried to sit up, muscles she'd never thought about now announcing themselves with sharp, specific pain. Coffee's ready, drink it fast. We're burning daylight. She wanted to point out that there was no daylight yet, but her mouth tasted like dirt and her tongue felt too thick for arguing. She took the tin cup he offered and drank the scalding coffee in 3 gulps that burned all the way down. They ate quickly, more jerky, some dried fruit that was hard as pebbles. Eliza's stomach turned at the thought of food, but she forced it down anyway. Rowan had already told her there'd be no stopping once they started the final climb. The horses were skittish this morning, rolling their eyes at something Eliza couldn't see or smell. Rowan calmed them with low words and steady hands, checking their loads one more time. They don't like going higher, he said. Can't say I blame them. The trail from their camp started steep and got worse. Within an hour, Eliza understood why Rowan had said yesterday looked easy. This wasn't a path anymore. It was a suggestion carved into rock, barely wide enough for the horses, dropping off into nothing on the left side. One wrong step and you'd fall far enough to think about all your mistakes on the way down. Her lungs fought for air that wasn't there. Each breath felt like sucking through wet cloth. Her legs burned, then went numb, then started burning again. The pack on her back, which hadn't seemed that heavy yesterday, now felt like it was full of anvils. Rowan kept climbing, never slowing, never looking back. Just that steady, relentless pace that ate up the mountain like he was walking to the corner store. Eliza's boot caught on a rock. She stumbled, grabbed for her horse's saddle, missed. For one horrible second, she was falling sideways toward the edge, toward all that empty air. Then Rowan's hand clamped around her wrist, yanking her back against the rock wall. She hit hard enough to knock the wind out of her, scraping her cheek on stone. You fall off my mountain. I'm not coming down to collect the pieces. His voice was calm, like he was commenting on the weather. Pay attention. He let go and kept walking. Eliza touched her cheek. Her fingers came away bloody. She wiped them on her pants and started climbing again, eyes locked on every footfall now. The sun rose somewhere behind the peaks, turning the sky from black to gray to pale blue, but it brought no warmth. The wind picked up, cutting through Eliza's coat like it wasn't even there. Her face went numb. Her hands, even in the thick gloves, felt like blocks of wood. How much further? Her voice came out raspy. 4 hours. Maybe 5. Eliza wanted to cry. She bit the inside of her cheek instead, tasting blood and pride in equal measure. They climbed through morning and into afternoon. The trees changed, pines giving way to twisted, wind-stunted things that barely qualified as trees at all. The air got thinner, colder, meaner. Eliza's vision started to blur at the edges, and her thoughts came slow and thick, like wading through mud. When Rowan finally stopped, she almost walked right into his back. There! Eliza followed his gaze. Ahead, tucked into a sheltered hollow against the mountain's face, stood a cabin. It was small, smaller than she'd expected, built from dark logs chinked with mud and moss. The roof was steep, designed to shed snow. One window on the front, shuttered now. A chimney made of stacked stone. It looked lonely, looked hard, looked like exactly the kind of place a man went to forget the world existed. Home, Rowan said, and started forward. The The cabin was indeed one room. A pot-bellied stove squatted in the corner, pipe running up through the roof. A bed built into the wall, wide enough for two if they didn't mind being close. A table with two chairs, shelves holding supplies, canned goods, flour sacks, coffee tins. A rifle rack near the door. Hooks on the wall for hanging clothes and tools. That was it. That was everything. Rowan started unloading the horses while Eliza stood in the doorway, trying to process that this was her life now. These four walls. This one room. This silent man in a mountain that wanted her dead. Don't just stand there. Woodbox needs filling before the storm hits. Eliza looked outside. The sky was still clear, pale blue, stretching forever. What storm? The one coming tomorrow. Can smell it. Rowan pointed to a stack of split logs outside, protected under an overhang. Fill the box inside. Then the one on the porch. Then help me with the horses. She wanted to ask how he could smell a storm that wasn't even visible yet. Instead, she started hauling wood. The work was immediate and endless. Wood to stack. Water to haul from the spring, which was 50 yards away, just like he'd said. But 50 yards felt like a mile when you were carrying 2 full buckets that sloshed freezing water down your legs. Supplies to sort and store. The horses to brush down and settle in a small lean-to that served as a stable. Eliza's hands were clumsy with cold and exhaustion. She dropped a water bucket halfway back to the cabin, watched a day's worth of drinking water soak into frozen ground, and had to go back for more. She stacked wood crooked and had to restack it. She couldn't get the stable door to latch properly, and Rowan had to show her 3 times before it finally stuck. He didn't yell, didn't even seem annoyed, just corrected her mistakes with the same flat patience he'd show a slow dog, and went back to his own work. By the time the sun started dropping behind the western peaks, Eliza was swaying on her feet. Her vision kept trying to tunnel down to a pinpoint. Her hands were shaking so hard she couldn't grip anything properly. Inside, Rowan's voice seemed to come from very far away. Before you fall down. The cabin was dark. Eliza stood in the doorway trying to remember what she was supposed to do next. Her brain felt like it was wrapped in cotton. Light flared as Rowan lit a lantern. Then another. Yellow glow pushed back the shadows, made the small space feel almost warm. Sit. Eliza sat at the table because standing seemed too complicated. She watched Rowan build a fire in the stove, his movements economical and sure. Within minutes, heat started radiating out, making her realize just how cold she'd gotten. He pulled items from the shelves, potatoes, an onion, a jar of something that might have been beans, set a pot on the stove, started cooking with the same methodical efficiency he did everything else. Take off those boots. Eliza's fingers fumbled with the laces. Everything was swollen, her feet, her hands. Her face felt puffy and strange. When she finally got the boots off, fresh blood had soaked through her socks. The blisters from yesterday had torn open and made new friends. Rowan glanced over, grunted, and went back to cooking. They ate in silence. The food was simple. Boiled potatoes, beans with some kind of salt pork, onions cooked until they were sweet. It was the best thing Eliza had ever tasted. Or maybe she was just that hungry. She cleaned her plate and most of a second helping before her stomach finally said enough. Your feet need wrapping. Rowan pulled out a tin box from under the bed. Inside were bandages, a brown bottle that probably meant pain, and a small jar of salve that smelled like pine, and something else Eliza couldn't identify. I can do it myself. You'll do it wrong. He knelt in front of her chair, waiting. Eliza's face went hot, but she stuck out her feet. Rowan peeled off her bloody socks without comment, examined the damage, and started cleaning the blisters with water he'd warmed on the stove. His hands were rough, calloused, but surprisingly gentle. You did better than I expected, he said, applying salve that stung like fire. Most women would have quit after the first hour. I don't quit, so you said. He wrapped her feet in clean bandages, working with practiced ease. But saying's different from doing. Now I know you meant it. It wasn't exactly praise, but coming from Rowan, it might as well have been a standing ovation. Eliza felt something loosen in her chest, tension she hadn't known she was carrying. How long before I stopped being useless? Rowan sat back on his heels, considering. Month, maybe 2, depends how fast you learn. And if I don't learn fast enough, then winter kills you. He said it matter of fact, like he was discussing the weather. Mountain doesn't care about effort, only results. He cleaned up the medical supplies and put them away. Outside, the wind was picking up, whistling through gaps in the chinking. The temperature was dropping fast. Eliza could feel it even with the stove burning. You take the bed tonight. I'll sleep on the floor. Eliza looked at the narrow bed built into the wall. It was barely big enough for one person, let alone two. Where will you sleep when... we're supposed to be... married? Rowan pulled blankets from a trunk. We will be. Soon as the circuit preacher comes through in spring. Until then, you're just a woman I hired to help with the homestead. Sleep where you want, do the work, don't cause problems. He made it sound so simple, so transactional, and maybe it was. What about after? Eliza's voice came out smaller than she intended. After we're married? Rowan was quiet for a long moment, spreading his blankets on the floor near the stove. When he spoke, he didn't look at her. I'm not expecting anything you're not willing to give. This is a partnership. You work, I work. We both survive. Everything else, he shrugged. We'll figure it out if we get there. It was the most decent thing any man had said to her in years. Eliza felt her throat go tight. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You haven't made it through winter. She climbed into the bed fully dressed except for her boots, too tired to even think about changing. The mattress was stuffed with something that crinkled, pine needles maybe, or dried grass. It smelled like wood smoke and cold air, and something else she couldn't name. The last thing she saw before exhaustion dragged her under was Rowan sitting by the stove, cleaning his rifle with slow, careful movements, his face unreadable in the lamplight. The storm hit just after dawn, exactly like Rowan had predicted. Eliza woke to the sound of wind screaming around the cabin, rattling the shutters, trying to find a way in. Snow wasn't falling, it was flying sideways, turning the world outside into a white wall of nothing. Storm will blow through by tomorrow, Rowan said, like this was normal, like the mountain wasn't trying to kill them. Good day to work inside. Work inside meant learning everything Eliza didn't know, which turned out to be almost everything. How to cook on the temperamental stove that had hot spots and cold spots and seemed to change its mind about which was which. How to conserve water because hauling it in a blizzard was dangerous and stupid. How to mend clothes properly so the patches held. How to sharpen a knife. How to maintain the lanterns. How to read the stove's mood and know when to add wood and when to let it breathe. Eliza burned breakfast, scorched the cornmeal into black sludge that smoked up the cabin and made Rowan's eyes water. She spilled lamp oil trying to refill the reservoir. She cut herself sharpening a knife, bled all over the whetstone, and had to clean it before it stained. Rowan corrected each mistake once, showed her the right way, then expected her to remember. When she forgot and made the same error twice, his jaw would tighten, but he wouldn't yell. Just show her again, slower, like she was particularly dense. By midday, Eliza wanted to throw something, wanted to scream, wanted to prove she wasn't completely incompetent at everything. I ran a household in St. Louis, she said, scraping burned cornmeal out of the pot. I could cook full meals, manage servants, plan dinner parties for 20 people. That's nice. Rowan was oiling the rifle's action. Servants aren't here to help you now. Dinner parties don't keep you alive when it's 40 below and the food runs out. What you knew there doesn't mean much up here. So I'm useless. You're learning. He set down the rifle. There's a difference. Doesn't feel like it. Rowan stood, crossed to where she was washing dishes in a basin of water they'd heated on the stove. He picked up one of the cups she'd already cleaned, held it to the lamplight, and showed her the grease still clinging to the rim. Useless would be not caring that it's still dirty. Useless would be giving up after burning breakfast. Useless would be crying about how hard it is instead of trying again. He set the cup down. You're frustrated. That's different from useless. I don't cry. I noticed. Something that might have been approval flickered across his face. That'll serve you well here. The storm blew itself out overnight, leaving drifts piled high against the cabin walls, and a silence so complete it rang in Eliza's ears. The world outside was transformed, everything buried under white, the familiar landmarks gone, replaced by curves and slopes of snow that looked deceptively soft. Don't walk on the drifts, Rowan warned. They're not solid. You'll fall through, maybe get stuck. If that happens, and I'm not around, you'll freeze before you dig yourself out. He made her practice walking in snow, showed her how to lift her feet high, how to test the depth before committing her weight, how to read the surface and know what was solid ground versus what was just air with a crust on top. Eliza fell anyway, went through up to her hip, felt the cold sink into her bones immediately. Rowan pulled her out and made her walk back to the cabin to change into dry clothes. "You've got maybe 10 minutes before frostbite starts," he said. "Less if the wind's blowing. Speed matters more than grace." They hauled water, chopped ice from the spring because the surface had frozen overnight, split more wood because the storms would keep coming and the wood box was never full enough, checked on the horses, made sure they had food and water, shoveled snow away from the lean-to door. Every task was harder than it should have been. The altitude made Eliza's lungs work double time for half the air. The cold made her fingers clumsy. The simple act of walking took concentration because one wrong step could mean falling, breaking something, becoming a burden Rowan would have to carry. She dropped an armload of wood, lost her grip on a water bucket and had to chase it as it rolled down a slope. Took 20 minutes to do a task that should have taken 5. Rowan never complained, never sighed, just picked up the dropped wood, retrieved the bucket, waited while she figured things out. But Eliza could feel her own inadequacy like a weight on her chest. That night, after another meal she'd helped cook without ruining, small victory. She sat at the table cleaning the dishes properly this time while Rowan worked on something at the other end. Some kind of trap, all wood and wire and tension springs. "Why did you really come up here?" she asked. 5 years ago. What made you decide people weren't worth the trouble?" Rowan's hand stilled on the trap. For a long moment, the only sound was wind pushing against the shutters and the stove's fire crackling. "Had a wife before," he said finally, "and a daughter. Sarah was 4. Eliza's hands went still in the dishwater. "Scarlet fever came through our town like wildfire. Took my daughter in 3 days, my wife the day after." His voice was flat, empty of inflection. "I buried them both in ground so frozen I had to use a pickaxe. Then I sold everything, came up here, and built a place where disease couldn't follow." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. It was 5 years ago." He went back to working on the trap, but his movements were stiffer now. "Point is, I know what it's like to lose everything, to run from something that won't leave you alone even when there's nothing left to take. You're running from a man. I'm running from memories. Different reasons, same mountain." Eliza dried her hands on a towel. "Does it work, the running?" "Some days." Rowan tested the trap's trigger mechanism. "Other days, you wake up and forget they're gone for just a second. Those are the worst ones." They sat in silence after that. Not uncomfortable exactly, but heavy with things neither of them wanted to say out loud. 2 broken people on a mountain, trying to build something out of the pieces they had left. The days blurred together into a rhythm of work and survival. Wake before dawn, build up the fire, cook breakfast without burning it, haul water, chop wood, check traps. Rowan had a line of them running through the forest, checking them every other day for rabbits or ptarmigan. Maintain equipment, cook dinner, clean, sleep, repeat. Eliza learned by failing, burned herself on the stove until she developed the same kind of burn scars Rowan had. Cut her hands splitting wood until they were covered in nicks and half-healed scabs. Dropped so many things that Rowan started catching them reflexively, like he expected her to fumble. But slowly, so slowly she almost didn't notice, things started to change. She could light the stove on the first try now instead of wasting 3 matches. Could haul water without spilling half of it. Could walk in snow without falling through every drift. Her hands, soft from years of indoor work, developed calluses that made gripping tools easier. Her body changed too. The sharp angles of near starvation filled out a little with regular meals. Her arms developed muscle from lifting, hauling, chopping. Her lungs adapted to the thin air. She could make it to the spring and back without feeling like she was drowning. "You're getting stronger," Rowan observed one morning, watching her split wood. Her form was still terrible, but she was at least hitting the rounds where she aimed now, instead of bouncing the axe off at random angles. "Still can't split as much as you. I've been doing this for 5 years. You've been doing it for 3 weeks. He took the axe from her, demonstrated the proper hip rotation again. "Strength matters, but technique matters more. Use your whole body, not just your arms." Eliza tried again. This time the round split clean, both halves falling away. The small victory made her smile, actually smile, for the first time since she'd arrived. Rowan saw it, Something shifted in his face, too quick to name, then it was gone. Do 10 more, then we're checking the trap line. The trap line meant hiking into the forest, carefully, watching for hidden ice and snow-covered deadfalls. Rowan moved through the trees like a ghost, reading tracks in the snow that Eliza couldn't even see. Deer came through here 2 days ago, moving north. He pointed at marks that looked like random dimples to her. And there's a fox den about 50 yards east. You can tell by the scat. How do you know all this? Pay attention long enough. The mountain tells you everything. He knelt by a trap that held a frozen rabbit. Animals have patterns. Weather has patterns. Even the silence has patterns. You learn to read them or you die stupid. He reset the trap, added the rabbit to the sack he carried, and moved on to the next one. Eliza followed, trying to see what he saw, but the forest just looked like trees and snow to her. At the 5th trap, they found something else. Tracks. Big ones. Bear? Eliza's voice came out smaller than she intended. Cat. Mountain lion. Probably male from the size. Rowan studied the tracks, following them with his eyes. Passed through yesterday. Good thing the horses were locked up. Is it still around? Maybe. He stood, scanning the tree line. They're usually not aggressive unless you corner them or get between a mother and cubs. But they're also curious. Might circle back to see what we are. He unslung his rifle from his shoulder and handed it to Eliza. You know how to shoot? No. Then it's time you learned. They spent the next hour in a small clearing. Rowan showed her how to hold the rifle, how to sight down the barrel, how to breathe and squeeze instead of pulling the trigger. The first time Eliza fired, the recoil nearly knocked her on her ass. The noise was incredible, echoing off the mountains like thunder. Again, she fired until her shoulder was one big bruise and her ears were ringing. Most of her shots went wide, hitting trees or disappearing into the snow. But 3 of them hit the target Rowan had marked, a dark knot in a dead pine about 30 yards out. Not terrible, he said, which was probably the highest praise he'd given her yet. Practice every day. Shooting's like everything else up here. You don't get good, you die. They walked back as the sun started dropping toward the peaks. The temperature fell with it, turning the air sharp enough to hurt. Eliza's face went numb, her breath freezing in her eyebrows and the loose hair around her face. Back at the cabin, Rowan showed her how to skin and clean the rabbit. It was messier than she expected, bloodier, harder to do right. Her knife slipped and she cut into the meat instead of between it and the hide. Rowan made her start over, waste less. Food's too precious to butcher badly. Every scrap matters. They ate the rabbit that night, roasted over the stove with wild onions Rowan had dried last summer. The meat was tough, gamey, nothing like the corn-fed rabbits Eliza had eaten in St. Louis, but she was hungry enough that it tasted perfect. Winter's really starting now, Rowan said, sopping up gravy with hard bread. The storms will get worse, longer, colder. We might not be able to get outside for days at a time. How do we prepare? We already are. Every day, all day. That's what all this work is. He gestured at the stocked shelves, the full wood boxes, the water barrels they'd been filling whenever the weather allowed. But you need to be ready for the other part too. What other part? Being trapped inside with someone you barely know for weeks at a time. Rowan met her eyes across the table. Cabin fever's real. Makes people mean, makes them see things that aren't there, fight about nothing, go a little crazy. We'll need rules. Eliza set down her fork. Like what? When one of us needs space, the other doesn't push. When one of us is angry, we wait until we're calm to talk about it. When one of us makes a mistake, we fix it instead of assigning blame. He paused. And if things get really bad, if we can't stand each other anymore, we survive anyway. Because hating each other is better than being dead. It was the most words she'd heard him string together at once, and the most honest assessment of what they were facing. I can agree to that. Good. He collected the dishes. Your turn to wash. The next storm hit 2 days later and lasted a week. 7 days of wind that sounded like wolves howling, snow that piled up past the windows, cold so intense that frost grew on the inside of the cabin walls despite the fire burning constantly. They rationed wood, rationed candles, rationed movement because every action required energy, and energy required food, and food was finite, Eliza learned what boredom really meant. Not the polite boredom of St. Louis society functions, but the crushing, mind-numbing boredom of having nothing to do and nowhere to go and no one to talk to except a man who used words like they cost money. She mended clothes that didn't need mending, reorganized shelves that were already organized, cleaned things that were already clean, counted the logs in the wood box, counted the beans in the jar, counted the cracks in the ceiling until Rowan told her to stop because it was driving him crazy listening to her whisper count. On the fourth day of being trapped inside, she snapped at him for the way he chewed his food. He stared at her like she'd lost her mind, which she probably had a little, and then went back to eating without comment. On the sixth day, they ran out of coffee. Real, bitter, impossible to wake up without coffee. The absence of it made them both irritable. They moved around each other like circling cats, careful not to touch, careful not to speak unless necessary. That night, Eliza couldn't sleep. The cabin felt too small, the walls pressing in. She could hear Rowan breathing on his pallet by the stove, could smell the wood smoke and wet wool and the faint smell of rabbit they'd had for dinner. "Tell me about St. Louis." Rowan's voice came out of the darkness. Eliza turned toward the sound. "What about it?" "Anything. What it looked like, what you did, just talk." So she did. Told him about the city, the brick buildings, the cobblestone streets, the riverboats on the Mississippi, the textile mill where she'd worked 12-hour days until her fingers bled, the boarding house where she'd lived with 5 other women in a room meant for 2, the market where you could buy oranges in winter if you had money, which she never did. She told him about her family, parents dead of cholera when she was 16, older brother gone to the war that never gave him back whole, about learning to survive on her own, about the careful calculations of rent and food, and whether she could afford lamp oil or just go to bed when the sun set. And finally, carefully, she told him about Drax, about the gradual suffocation of having every choice taken away, every door closed, every friend turned into leverage, about stealing those papers and running, and the sick fear that lived in her chest every day since, waiting for him to catch up. When she finished, the cabin was quiet except for wind and fire. "He won't find you here," Rowan said finally. "Even if he somehow tracked you to Steep Ridge, even if someone told him where you went, he won't make it up that trail. And if he somehow does..." "What?" "Then I'll shoot him and bury him where nobody'll ever look." He said it the same way he'd say he'd chop wood or check traps. Simple statement of fact, no drama, no bravado. Somehow that made it more convincing than any passionate declaration. "Thank you. Don't thank me. I'm protecting my homestead. Can't have strangers showing up whenever they want." But Eliza heard what he wasn't saying. Heard the same thing she wasn't saying when she agreed to marry a stranger and climb a mountain. Sometimes survival looked like partnership. Sometimes running away looked like running toward something. Sometimes you just had to trust that the mountain would be enough. The storm finally broke on the 8th day. They woke to silence so complete it felt wrong after all that wind. Rowan opened the door to a world transformed. Snow piled higher than his head in some places. The path to the spring completely buried. The lean-to's roof bowed under the weight. "Dig," he said, handing Eliza a shovel. They dug for hours, cleared a path to the spring, cleared the lean-to roof before it collapsed on the horses, cleared around the cabin itself so they wouldn't be buried when the next storm hit. Eliza's arms screamed. Her back felt like someone was driving nails into her spine. But she kept digging, matching Rowan's pace, refusing to be the one who quit first. When they finally stopped, the sun was setting and they were both soaked with sweat despite the cold. Rowan looked at her, really looked, maybe for the first time, and gave a small nod. "You'll make it through winter." It wasn't quite a compliment, wasn't quite approval, but it was close enough that Eliza felt something warm bloom in her chest, chasing back some of the cold. That night, after they'd eaten and cleaned up, Rowan pulled out a worn deck of cards. "You play poker?" "I worked in a textile mill. Everyone plays poker." They played for dried beans since neither of them had money worth betting. Eliza won the first 3 hands, lost the next 5, and realized that Rowan was teaching her tells while pretending to just play cards. "You touch your braid when you're bluffing," he said, laying down a straight that beat her pair. "I do not." "You do, and you bite your lip when you've got a good hand." Eliza consciously kept her hands on the table for the next hand. She still lost, but it was closer. They played until the lamp oil got low, then packed up and went to their separate beds. But before Rowan blew out the last lamp, he paused. "You did good today, with the digging. Thanks. And for what it's worth," he hesitated, like the words cost him something. "I'm glad you made it up that mountain. Place feels less empty with someone else here." Before Eliza could respond, he blew out the lamp and the cabin went dark. But she lay awake for a long time after, thinking about loneliness and partnership and the strange shape comfort could take when survival depended on it. Outside, the mountain settled into winter silence, and for the first time since she'd arrived, Eliza thought she might actually survive to see spring. Winter deepened. The storms came with regularity now, every 4 or 5 days, like clockwork written in snow and wind. Between them were windows of brutal clarity, the sky so blue it hurt to look at, and the cold so sharp it could crack your teeth if you breathed wrong. Eliza stopped counting days. Time moved differently up here, measured in tasks completed and storms survived rather than calendar dates. Her hands looked like Rowan's now, scarred, calloused, competent. She could split wood for an hour without stopping, haul water without spilling, shoot well enough that she'd brought down a ptarmigan 2 days ago with a shot Rowan had grudgingly called decent. Not bad for someone who couldn't hold a rifle a month back, he'd said, which translated from Rowan speak to high praise. They'd developed a rhythm, the two of them, a language of work and silence that didn't need many words. Rowan would glance at the wood box and Eliza would know to fill it. She'd set out the medical kit and he'd understand she'd cut herself again. He'd pull out the rifle and she'd automatically check that ammunition was ready. It wasn't friendship exactly. Wasn't romance despite the marriage arrangement waiting for spring. It was something else. Partnership forged in necessity, respect earned through competence, trust built one task at a time. The morning everything changed started like any other. Eliza woke before dawn, got the fire going, put coffee on to boil. Rowan came back from checking on the horses, stamping snow off his boots, tracks outside the lean-to. Eliza looked up from slicing bread. "The cat again?" "No. Human." He set his rifle by the door, moved to the window, peered through the shutters. 3 sets, maybe 4, came up from the south during the night. The bread knife went still in Eliza's hand. Her heart started doing something complicated and painful in her chest. Could be hunters. Trappers sometimes come through, though it's rare this time of year. Rowan's voice was carefully neutral, but his hand stayed near the rifle. Or it could be your problem following you home. Eliza set down the knife before her shaking hands dropped it. "It's been 2 months. How could he—" "Men with money have long reach. You know that better than I do." Rowan checked the rifle's load, grabbed ammunition from the shelf. "How many men would he send?" "I don't know. Enough to make sure I couldn't run again." She crossed to her pack, pulled out the leather envelope she'd kept hidden even from Rowan, tucked it inside her shirt against her skin. "What do we do?" "First, we make sure that's what this is. Could still be nothing." But Rowan was already loading his pockets with extra ammunition, checking the knife on his belt. "You stay inside, lock the door after me. Someone comes who isn't me, you shoot through the window. I'm not hiding while you—" "You're not hiding, you're defending." He handed her the rifle. "This is my mountain. I know every rock, every tree, every place to hide or fight. You don't. You stay here, you keep the high ground, you make sure nobody gets inside. That's not hiding, that's tactics." Before Eliza could argue, he was out the door. She locked it behind him, moved to the window, and waited with the rifle across her knees and her heart trying to punch through her ribs. Minutes crawled past. The sun rose higher, turning the snow from gray to white to blinding. Eliza's eyes watered from staring at the same stretch of trees, looking for movement, for color, for anything that didn't belong. Then she saw them. 4 men on horseback, picking their way up the trail Eliza and Rowan had taken 2 months ago. Even at this distance, she could see they were struggling. Horses slipping on ice, riders hunched against cold they weren't prepared for. City men trying to climb a mountain that ate city men for breakfast. But they were here. They'd found her. The lead rider stopped about 200 yards from the cabin. He was big, wrapped in a coat that probably cost more than the cabin itself. Even from here, Eliza could see the way he sat his horse, confident, entitled, like he owned whatever he was looking at. Not Drax himself. He'd never risked the climb, but someone he'd sent, someone he trusted to bring her back or make sure she never told her story to anyone. Rowan appeared from the tree line to their left, rifle in hand, but pointed at the ground. Neutral. Non-threatening. Just a man protecting his property. The lead rider turned to face him. They were too far away for Eliza to hear words, but she could read the body language. The rider gesturing at the cabin, Rowan shaking his head. The rider's hand moving toward his coat, toward a weapon, maybe, or papers, some kind of legal document that meant nothing this far from civilization. Then one of the other men pointed directly at the cabin, at the window, at Eliza. They'd seen her. The lead rider spurred his horse forward. Rowan stepped into his path, rifle coming up in one smooth motion. The universal language of stop or I'll make you stop. The rider reined in, but the others were spreading out now, flanking. One broke right, heading for the lean-to and the horses. Another went left toward the spring. They were trying to surround the cabin, cut off escape routes. Eliza's hands tightened on her own rifle. Through the window, she could see Rowan still facing down the leader, but his eyes were tracking the others, calculating. 3 against 1. Bad odds, even for a man who knew every inch of this mountain. She made a decision. Unlocking the door, Eliza stepped out onto the porch. The cold hit her like a fist, but she barely felt it. She raised the rifle, sighted on the man heading for the lean-to, and fired. The shot went wide, intentionally. Snow exploded 3 feet in front of the horse, which reared and screamed. The rider fought to stay in the saddle, cursing. "Next one's not a warning," Eliza shouted. All 4 men turned to look at her. The lead rider pushed back his hood, and Eliza's stomach went to ice. She knew him. Marcus Webb, Drax's head of security. A man who'd started as a Pinkerton and graduated to worse things. She'd seen him break a dock worker's arm for the crime of asking Drax for owed wages. "Miss Boone," Webb's voice carried across the snow, smooth and cold. "Mr. Drax has been very worried about you. Sent us all this way to make sure you're safe." "I'm perfectly safe. That's not what it looks like from here. Living in the wilderness with a strange man, no proper marriage, no family to protect you." Webb's smile was all teeth, no warmth. "Mr. Drax just wants you to come home where you belong. He's even willing to forget about those papers you took. All is forgiven." "I'm not going anywhere with you." "I'm afraid you don't have a choice, miss. Mr. Drax has a warrant for your arrest. Theft of valuable documents, destruction of property, fraud." Webb pulled a paper from his coat, waved it like it meant something. "You can come peacefully, or my associates can assist you. Either way, you're coming down off this mountain." Rowan's voice cut through the cold air. "She says she's not going. I'm saying the same. You've got about 30 seconds to turn around before things get unfriendly." Webb looked at him like he was something stuck to his boot. "This doesn't concern you, mountain man. This is a legal matter between Mr. Drax and his fiancée." "I'm not his fiancée," Eliza said. "Mr. Drax begs to differ. You accepted his gifts, lived in his house, wore his ring." Webb's smile widened. "In the eyes of the law, that's a contract, and breaking contracts has consequences. The law doesn't reach this far up." Rowan's rifle was still pointed at the ground, but his finger was on the trigger guard now. "And your 30 seconds just ran out." For a long moment, nobody moved. 4 armed men facing 2, weighing their odds, calculating whether violence was worth it. The wind pushed between them, carrying snow in lazy swirls. Then Webb nodded, almost imperceptibly. The man who'd been heading for the lean-to reached for his gun. Rowan shot him. The sound cracked across the mountainside like breaking bone. The man went backwards off his horse, clutching his shoulder, screaming. His horse bolted, nearly trampling him before disappearing into the trees. "That was his shooting arm," Rowan said calmly, already working the rifle's action to chamber another round. "Next one's a killing shot. Your choice." Webb's hand was inside his coat now, wrapped around something. The other 2 men had drawn their weapons, but they were looking at their wounded companion rolling in the snow and reconsidering their life choices. "You just assaulted an officer of the law," Webb said. "You're not law up here. You're just 4 men trying to kidnap a woman who doesn't want to go." Rowan took 3 steps forward, and somehow those 3 steps made him look bigger, more dangerous. "And now you're 3 men, one of them bleeding. How do you like those odds?" Eliza watched Webb calculate, watched him weigh the value of bringing her back against the cost of dying on this frozen mountain, watched greed war with survival instinct. Greed won. "We're not leaving without her." Webb drew his pistol. Mr. Drax pays too well for us to go back empty-handed. The next seconds happened in the strange, stretched-out time that comes with violence. Webb aimed at Rowan. One of the other men swung his rifle toward Eliza. She fired first, purely on instinct and fear, and saw snow kick up near the horse's feet. The horse screamed and reared, its rider fought for control. Rowan's rifle cracked again. The man aiming at Eliza jerked sideways, hit in the leg. He dropped his rifle and grabbed his thigh, blood already seeping between his fingers. 2 down. Webb fired. The bullet hit the cabin wall 6 inches from Rowan's head. Rowan dove behind a snowdrift, came up shooting. His shot took Webb's horse in the chest. The animal collapsed, pinning Webb's leg underneath. The last man, still mounted, looked at his companions. 1 shot in the shoulder, 1 shot in the leg, 1 trapped under a dying horse, and made the smart choice. He turned his mount and ran, disappearing back down the trail at a speed that would probably break both their necks on the ice. Silence fell, broken only by the wounded horse's screaming and Webb's cursing as he tried to pull his leg free. Rowan approached carefully, rifle trained on Webb. "Eliza, get rope from the lean-to." She ran, grabbed rope with shaking hands, came back to find Rowan had Webb on his belly in the snow, knee on his back. The man she'd shot in the leg was passed out from pain. The 1 shot in the shoulder was sitting up, holding his wound, smart enough not to try anything. They tied them up. Not gently. Rowan's face was stone, his movements mechanical, but Eliza could see white around his knuckles where he gripped the rope. "What now?" she asked. Rowan looked at the 3 wounded men, at the dead horse, at the blood staining the snow. "Now we have a problem." They dragged the prisoners into the lean-to, warmer than outside, not warm enough to be comfortable. Rowan checked their wounds, bandaged them enough that they wouldn't bleed out, and locked them in. Back in the cabin, Eliza's hands finally started shaking, reactions setting in, adrenaline draining away and leaving nothing but fear and exhaustion behind. She'd shot at a man. Maybe hit him. Maybe killed his horse. The reality of it made her stomach twist. "You did good out there." Rowan was checking his ammunition, reloading. "Steady hands, good instinct. Probably saved my life when you shot at that second man." "I missed. You distracted him." "That's almost as good." He set down the rifle, looked at her directly. "But they're not going to give up. Webb's got too much pride, and that 4th man will either run to town or run to Drax. Either way, more will come." Eliza sank into a chair. Her whole body felt like it was vibrating. "How many do you think Drax will send?"
"As many as it takes. Man like that, losing means looking weak. He can't afford weak." Rowan poured coffee, handed her a cup. "We've got maybe 2 days before the next wave arrives. Maybe 3 if we're lucky, and another storm hits. So we run."
"To where?" "It's the middle of winter. Nearest town is a full day's ride in good weather, and the weather's not good. We'd freeze before we got halfway." He drank his coffee, staring at the wall like he could see through it to some solution. "We could try to make it to the Halverson place, but that's 12 miles of exposed trail. If they catch us in the open, we're dead." Eliza pulled the envelope from her shirt, set it on the table. "These papers, they're proof of everything Drax has done, bribery, fraud, murder. If I could get them to someone who'd actually look at them." "Who? The sheriff he owns, the judge in his pocket?" Rowan's voice was harsh with reality. "Those papers might matter in a fair court, but there's no such thing when money's involved." "So we just give up? Let him take me back?"
"I didn't say that."
Rowan stood, paced to the window, looked out at the mountain. When he spoke again, his voice was different, calmer, like he'd made a decision. "We fight, but we fight smart. Use what we have." "What do we have?" He turned back to her, and for the first time since she'd met him, Rowan smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a man who'd just thought of something terrible. "We have a mountain, and they don't know it like we do." They spent the rest of that day and all of the next preparing. Rowan showed Eliza the mountain the way he knew it, not just as a place to survive, but as a weapon. The pass they came through, that's the only way up here that horses can manage. It's narrow, steep, unstable in places. He drew it out on paper, marking key spots. There's a section about halfway up where the trail runs under a rock shelf. Snow builds up on that shelf all winter. Enough weight and it comes down. An avalanche. Controlled one. We set charges, wire them together, trigger them when they're in position. He looked at her. It's risky. Timing has to be perfect. But if it works, we bury them and the problem all at once. And if it doesn't work, then we're fighting uphill against better numbers and we probably die. He said it matter of fact, like discussing the weather. But that's the situation anyway. At least this way, we choose the ground. Eliza thought about those papers, about the truth they held, about the women like her that Drax had destroyed and would keep destroying if someone didn't stop him. How do we set the charges? Rowan pulled a wooden box from under his bed. Inside were sticks of dynamite, fuses, and wire. Left over from mining work I did before I built this place. Been saving them for stumps that needed clearing. They worked through the night. Rowan showed her how to pack the charges, how to wire them in series, how to calculate fuse length for timing. It was delicate work, dangerous, the kind of thing that killed you if you made mistakes. But Eliza's hands were steady now, steadier than they'd been in months. By dawn, they had 6 charges ready. Small, but powerful enough to bring down that unstable shelf if placed right. We'll plant them at first light, Rowan said. Set up the trigger wire, then get to high ground and wait. When they come, and they will come, we drop the mountain on them. What about Webb and the others, the ones in the lean-to? Rowan's jaw tightened. We bring them down after. Turn them over to whatever law isn't in Drax's pocket. Let them tell their story about how they came up here to kidnap a woman and got shot for their trouble. It was a plan. Not a good plan maybe, but better than waiting to be taken. They set out before sunrise, moving fast through snow that had crusted overnight. The charges were heavy, the wire heavier. Rowan led them down to the pass, to the narrow section he'd marked, and showed Eliza where each charge needed to go. She climbed, wedged explosives into cracks in the rock shelf above the trail, ran wire from one to the next, connecting them like deadly beads on a string. Her fingers went numb despite the gloves. The altitude made her head swim. One wrong move and she'd fall or trigger the charges early, or both. But she didn't fall. Didn't make mistakes. Did the work like Rowan had taught her, careful, methodical, treating fear as information rather than paralysis. When they finished, the sun was fully up and the charges were invisible unless you knew where to look. Rowan ran the trigger wire back up the slope, concealed it in snow, and positioned it behind a boulder that would give them cover. Now we wait. They didn't have to wait long. Around midday, movement on the lower trail. More riders this time. Eliza counted 7, maybe 8. They were moving slower than Webb's group, more cautious, weapons already drawn, learning from the first group's mistakes. Rowan watched through a small spyglass he'd pulled from his pack. Professional. Look at how they're spread out, how they're watching the tree line. These aren't just hired thugs. These are men who know how to fight. Can the charges stop them? We're about to find out. He handed her the spyglass. Watch for my signal. When I pull the trigger wire, you cover your ears and keep your head down. The noise will be bad, but the snow coming down after will be worse. The riders kept climbing. Eliza could see them clearly now through the spyglass. Hard men with harder eyes, checking corners, expecting ambush. The lead rider looked familiar. It took her a moment to place him. Marcus Webb. He was back, bandaged, limping, but back. Whatever Drax was paying him was worth more than fear or pain or common sense. That's Webb in front, she told Rowan. The one we shot. Tough bastard. Rowan checked the trigger wire. Good. Rather bury him than wonder when he'll show up again. The riders entered the pass, filed into the narrow section under the rock shelf. Bunched up because there was no room to spread out. Perfect. Rowan's hand closed on the trigger wire. Wait, Eliza said. For what? She watched through the spyglass. 8 men in the kill zone now, but there was a 9th bringing up the rear, still 50 yards back, leading a pack horse, probably carrying supplies. If they triggered now, he'd escape. He'd go back to Drax with the story. Last one needs to get closer. He gets closer, the others get through. Just a few more seconds. The 9th man urged his horse forward. 40 yards, 30, 20. Webb's horse cleared the far end of the kill zone. He was through, but the others were still bunched up, and the 9th man was finally in range. Now, Eliza said. Rowan yanked the wire. For half a second, nothing happened. Then the world exploded. The charges went off in sequence, each one feeding into the next. The sound was enormous, echoing off peaks and valleys until it seemed like the whole mountain was screaming. The rock shelf shuddered, cracked, and gave way. Snow came down. Not falling, collapsing, like a frozen ocean wave breaking over the pass. It hit the trail with a roar that drowned out the men's screams and the horses' panic. Tons of it, burying everything, reshaping the landscape in seconds. Then silence. Terrible, ringing silence. The pass was gone. Where there had been a trail, there was now a wall of snow and ice 30 feet high. If there were men under it, they weren't moving, weren't making sound, weren't anything anymore. Eliza lowered the spyglass with shaking hands. She'd just killed people. Maybe all of them. The reality of it was too big to process, so she didn't try. Just sat there, breathing hard, while her brain tried to catch up with what her body had done. Did we get them all? Rowan's voice sounded far away. She raised the spyglass again, scanned the avalanche zone. Snow was still settling, clouds of it hanging in the air. Nothing moved except the wind pushing it around. Then she saw him, Webb. On the far side of the avalanche, having cleared the kill zone seconds before the charges blew. His horse was down, either thrown by the explosion or caught by the edge of the snow slide. But Webb was on his feet, staring at the wall of snow that had swallowed his men. He was alive, and he was looking up the slope, right at where Eliza and Rowan were hiding. "We got everyone but Webb," she said. Rowan cursed, grabbed his rifle. "Can he climb around?" "I don't know. Maybe." The avalanche changed everything. They watched Webb through the spyglass, taking turns. He walked the length of the snow wall, testing it, looking for a way through or around. Found nothing. The avalanche had sealed the pass completely. Finally, Webb looked up at the mountain one more time. Even from this distance, Eliza could feel his eyes on her. Could feel his promise that this wasn't over. Then he turned and started back down the trail, limping badly, leading his injured horse. "We need to go after him," Eliza said. "He'll go back to Drax, tell him what happened, come back with even more men." "Let him go." "What?" Rowan lowered the spyglass. "He's one man, on foot, wounded, with a lame horse. It'll take him 2 days minimum to get down to town, longer if the weather turns. And it will turn. There's another storm coming. I can smell it." So by the time he gets down and Drax sends another group, we'll be gone. We'll pack what we can carry, take the horses, and head to town ourselves. The fast way. He pointed east to a different trail Eliza had never seen. It's steeper, more dangerous. Horses might not make it, but we can do it in half a day if we push hard. And then what? Drax owns the town. He owns the sheriff and the local judge. But he doesn't own the federal marshal, and he doesn't own the newspapers. Rowan started gathering their gear. "We get to town. We make noise. Show those papers to everyone who'll look. Get the story out before Drax can bury it." It was a plan. Still not a good one, but better than waiting on a mountain for more killers to arrive. They hiked back to the cabin fast, collected the prisoners from the lean-to. Webb's men were in bad shape, cold, scared, their wounds infected from lack of proper care. But they could walk. "You're taking us down?" The one shot in the shoulder looked confused. "Your evidence," Rowan said. "Living proof of what Drax sent up here. You'll testify to that, or I'll leave you tied up here and let the next storm sort you out." They testified, promised it, swore it, would have promised anything to get off that mountain alive. Packing took an hour. They could only take what the horses could carry: food, ammunition, the medical kit, Eliza's papers, blankets for the cold. Everything else stayed behind. The cabin Rowan had built, the life he'd carved out, the isolation he'd paid for with 5 years of grief and work. "You're giving up everything," Eliza said, watching him take one last look around. "I'm choosing something else." He shouldered his pack. "Place is just wood and nails. Turns out having someone to fight beside is worth more than 4 walls." They left before noon, pushing the horses hard down the eastern trail. It was everything Rowan had promised: steep, icy, barely wide enough for the animals. Twice they had to dismount and lead the horses over sections where one wrong step meant falling hundreds of feet. The 3 prisoners struggled, slowing them down. But they kept moving, driven by fear of the mountain and fear of what Rowan would do if they stopped. By nightfall, they were below the tree line. By midnight, they could see the lights of Steep Ridge in the valley below. And behind them, up in the high peaks, snow started to fall. The storm Rowan had smelled was coming in fast, erasing their tracks, burying the pass even deeper, sealing off the mountain like a door slamming shut. They rode into town just before dawn, 4 people on horseback and 3 prisoners on foot, all of them looking like they'd fought a war, which Eliza supposed they had. The town was just waking up, shopkeepers opening, early risers heading to work. They stopped and stared at the strange procession, at Eliza in her mountain gear, face scarred by wind and cold, at Rowan with his rifle and his flat expression, at the 3 wounded men stumbling behind. "Where's the federal marshal's office?" Rowan asked a man sweeping his porch. The man pointed, speechless. They rode straight there, dismounted, walked inside with the prisoners and the papers and a story that sounded too crazy to be true. The marshal, a gray-haired man with eyes that had seen too much, listened to all of it, looked at the papers, questioned the prisoners, who confirmed everything. Then he looked at Eliza.
"Miss Boone, these are serious accusations. If what you're saying is true, Victor Drax is guilty of crimes that'll see him hanged. But if it's not true, it's true." Eliza set the envelope on his desk. "It's all there. Names, dates, payments, proof of everything." The marshal opened the envelope carefully, started reading. His expression changed from skepticism to shock to something that looked like anger. "Where did you get these?" "I stole them from his study the night I ran." "You stole them," the marshal repeated, "which means Drax can argue they're forgeries, that you fabricated them." Eliza's heart sank. Of course. Of course there was another catch, another way for Drax to wriggle free. But Rowan stepped forward. "Those 3 men outside, they came up a mountain in the middle of winter to kidnap her. You think they'd do that for lies? And there's 7 more men buried under snow in the pass, killed trying to bring her back. All that for fake papers?" The marshal looked at him, looked at Eliza, looked back at the papers. "I'll need to verify these, cross-check the names, confirm the payments. That'll take time." "How much time?" Eliza asked. "Weeks. Maybe months. Drax could be gone by then. Could destroy evidence, buy more witnesses, disappear. Maybe." The marshal closed the envelope. "But the law moves slow, miss. That's frustrating, but it's also what keeps it from being just a mob. I'll start the investigation today. In the meantime, you and Mr. Hale should stay somewhere safe, somewhere public, with witnesses. If what you're saying is true, Drax will try to silence you before this gets to trial." They left the marshal's office with more questions than answers, but at least the beginning of hope. The town was fully awake now, people openly staring at them. Word was spreading. The strange woman who'd come to marry Rowan Hale had returned, bringing violence and accusations and a story too wild to ignore. Rowan led them to the boarding house where Eliza had stayed her first night. The same sour-faced woman ran it. She looked at them both, at their mountain-worn clothes and hard expressions, and quoted a price that was twice what she'd charged before. Rowan paid it without comment. They ate in the common room, the first hot meal from an actual kitchen either of them had had in months. It tasted like heaven, but Eliza could barely swallow. She kept watching the door, expecting Webb to walk through, expecting Drax himself to appear with more bought law and more armed men. "He'll come," she said quietly. "I know." Rowan was methodically working through a plate of eggs and bacon. "But we're not alone anymore. We've got witnesses now. The marshal knows. The town knows. Harder to make people disappear when everyone's watching." "You don't know Drax." "No, but I know men like him." Rowan set down his fork. "They're dangerous when they've got power and darkness to hide in. But light changes things, and you just lit a fire under him that the whole territory is going to see." Eliza wanted to believe him, wanted to think that truth and justice and doing the right thing would be enough. But she'd spent too many months running to trust hope that easily. Still, as she sat in that common room with Rowan across from her and the morning sun streaming through dirty windows, she felt something shift. She wasn't running anymore, wasn't hiding. For the first time since she'd discovered those papers, she was standing still and fighting back. And whether she won or lost, at least she'd go down on her own terms. The first 3 days in Steep Ridge passed in a strange suspension. Eliza stayed mostly in her room at the boarding house, watching the street through lace curtains that had gone gray with age. Rowan kept his rifle close and his back to the wall whenever they were in public. They were waiting for the other shoe to drop, for Drax to make his move, for violence to find them again. It came, but not the way they expected. On the 4th morning, a well-dressed man arrived on the afternoon stage. Eliza spotted him from her window, expensive coat, polished boots, carrying a leather case that screamed lawyer.
He went straight to the marshal's office and stayed there for 2 hours. When he emerged, he was smiling. "That's not good," Rowan said from his position by the door. They found out just how not good that evening. The marshal came to the boarding house himself, hat in hand, looking 10 years older than he had 4 days ago. "Miss Boone, Mr. Hale, we need to talk." They sat in the common room, which the boarding house owner cleared of other guests with a look that said she knew trouble when it was sitting at her tables. The marshal set his hat down carefully, like it might break. "That man who came today, his name's Edmund Carver. He's a lawyer from St. Louis, represents Victor Drax." The marshal pulled out papers from his coat. "He's got documents here, affidavits, witness statements, even a telegraph from a federal judge, all saying that Miss Boone is mentally unstable, that she stole from Mr. Drax while in his employ, and that the papers she claims are evidence are clever forgeries she created to avoid prosecution for theft." Eliza's hands clenched in her lap. "That's a lie. All of it." "I know. Or at least I believe it is." The marshal looked tired. "But Carver's got statements from a dozen people, maids who worked in Drax's house, shopkeepers, even a doctor, all saying you showed signs of hysteria, made wild accusations, talked about running away to escape imaginary persecution. He paid them, threatened them, same as he did with the judges and lawmen in those papers. Probably, but proving that is the problem." The marshal spread the documents on the table. "See, the papers you brought me, they're convincing. Real signatures, real seals. But without the original ledgers they reference, without the actual bank records of the payments, they're just papers. Could be real. Could be excellent forgeries. And Carver's arguing the latter." Rowan leaned forward. "What about the men we brought down? The ones who came up the mountain to kidnap her? Carver says they were hired to retrieve stolen property and ensure Miss Boone's safe return to receive medical treatment. Says the shooting was self-defense after you attacked them unprovoked." The marshal held up a hand before Rowan could interrupt. "I know. I don't believe it. But what I believe doesn't matter if I can't prove it in court." "So Drax gets away with it." Eliza's voice came out flat. "He wins." "Not necessarily." The marshal pulled out another paper, this one with multiple signatures. "I've been doing some digging on my own. Cross-reference the names in your papers with land deals, court cases, business transactions. Found some interesting patterns. 3 men named in your documents as receiving bribes. All dead within 6 months of the dates listed. 2 disappeared entirely. 1 had an unfortunate accident." He let that sink in. Now, that could be coincidence, or it could be Drax cleaning up loose ends. But it's enough to make the federal prosecutor interested. Interested enough that he's coming down from Denver to review the case personally. "When?" Eliza asked. 2 weeks. Maybe 3, depending on the weather. The marshal gathered his papers. "Until then, I need you both to stay visible. Stay public. Don't give Drax any opportunity to claim you disappeared or came to harm under mysterious circumstances. And whatever you do, don't leave town." After he left, Eliza and Rowan sat in silence. The common room felt too small suddenly, the walls pressing in. 3 weeks, Eliza said. He could do a lot in 3 weeks. So could we. Rowan stood, held out his hand. "Come on." "Where?" "You'll see." He led her to the newspaper office, a cramped building that smelled of ink and old paper. The editor was a thin man with spectacles and ink stains on his fingers. His name was Samuel Potter, and he listened to Eliza's story with the intensity of a man who'd been waiting his whole life for something worth printing. "You understand what you're asking," Potter said when she finished. "You want me to print accusations against one of the wealthiest men west of the Mississippi. If you're wrong, or if I can't prove what I print, he'll sue me into oblivion. And if you don't print it, he'll keep destroying people until someone stops him." Eliza pushed the papers across his desk. "These are copies. The marshal has the originals. You can verify the signatures, check the dates against public records. It's all there." Potter picked up the papers with hands that shook slightly. Not from fear, from excitement. "If this is real, it's real. Then this is the biggest story to hit this territory in a decade." He looked up at them both. "But I'll need more than just documents. I'll need testimony. People willing to go on record about what Drax has done." "The men we brought down from the mountain," Rowan said. "They'll talk." "Will they? Or will Drax's lawyer get to them first, convince them that staying quiet is healthier than speaking up?" It was a good question. Eliza thought about the three prisoners, scared and wounded, probably sitting in cells right now, wondering if cooperation or silence would save their skins. What if we could find others? She said slowly. Other people Drax has hurt. There have to be more. Men like him don't just ruin one person. Potter leaned back in his chair, thinking. You'd need to be careful. If Drax finds out you're gathering testimony against him, he'll move to silence witnesses before they can talk. Then we'll be careful. Eliza looked at Rowan. But we'll do it. Over the next week, they became investigators, started asking questions, talking to people who'd had dealings with Drax or his companies. It was slow work, dangerous work. Most people refused to talk, fear etched into their faces at just the mention of his name. But some did talk. Quietly, in back rooms and dark corners, they told their stories. A widow whose land Drax had bought for pennies after her husband died in a suspicious fire. A merchant whose business mysteriously burned down after he refused to sell. A young woman who'd worked in Drax's textile mill and disappeared after threatening to expose the unsafe conditions. Each story added another piece to the picture. Each voice made Drax's empire look less like legitimate business and more like organized predation. Potter printed it all. Not the accusations directly, he was too smart for that, but the questions. Articles about mysterious fires, missing persons, land deals that didn't quite add up. He never mentioned Drax by name, but anyone paying attention could read between the lines. The newspaper sold out 3 days running, and Drax noticed. The lawyer, Carver, showed up at the newspaper office on the 8th day. He was smooth, polite, carrying a briefcase full of legal threats. Mr. Potter, I represent Mr. Victor Drax, who is concerned about the recent articles in your publication. Articles that, while not naming him directly, seem designed to damage his reputation through innuendo and unsubstantiated rumor. Potter kept setting type while Carver talked. I report facts, Mr. Carver. Public record. If Mr. Drax finds those facts uncomfortable, perhaps he should examine his business practices. Mr. Drax's business practices are beyond reproach. These insinuations of wrongdoing are based entirely on the ravings of a disturbed woman who stole from him and is now attempting to justify her theft through elaborate fiction. Miss Boone has documentation, forgeries. We've established this with the marshal. Have you? Because from what I understand, the marshal is still investigating, as is a federal prosecutor. Potter finally looked up from his work. Until they conclude their investigations, I'll keep reporting what I find. And what I'm finding is a pattern of dead witnesses, missing persons, and financial transactions that seem designed to hide something. That's not innuendo, Mr. Carver. That's journalism. Carver's smile went sharp as a knife. Journalism can be a dangerous profession, Mr. Potter. Presses break, buildings burn. I'd hate to see anything unfortunate happen to your livelihood. Is that a threat? It's observation. Good day. After he left, Potter locked the door and pulled the shades. His hands were shaking now, and not from excitement. He's going to burn me out, he said. Tonight, tomorrow, soon. That's how Drax works. Rowan had been standing quiet in the corner. Now he stepped forward. Then we'll be ready for it. That night, they kept watch. Rowan on the roof of the building across from the newspaper office, Eliza in Potter's back room, both armed and waiting. The marshal had deputies stationed around town, but they couldn't be everywhere. The fire starters came at 2 a.m. Eliza saw them first, 3 men with cans of kerosene, moving quiet through the alley behind the newspaper office. She fired a warning shot through the open window, the sound cracking through the night like breaking bone. The men scattered. 2 ran. 1 dropped his kerosene can and kept running. The 3rd pulled a gun and fired back. His shot went through the window, spraying glass across the room. Eliza dropped behind Potter's desk, heart hammering, fumbling to reload. She could hear shouting now, the marshal's deputies responding to the gunfire. Another shot, this one from above. Rowan's rifle. The man in the alley screamed, grabbed his leg, went down. The marshal's men caught 2 of them. The 3rd escaped into the darkness, but he'd left behind enough evidence. The kerosene cans, his wounded partner who sang like a canary to avoid hanging, testimony that led straight back to Carver's hotel room where they'd been hired and paid. By sunrise, Carver was in custody. By noon, he was demanding a lawyer of his own and refusing to answer questions. But the damage was done. Potter printed a special edition with the headline, Arson Attempt Foiled, Drax Lawyers Hired Thugs Arrested. This time, Drax's name was right there in bold type. The town erupted. People who'd been afraid to speak started talking. The widow whose land was stolen gave a statement. The merchant whose business burned testified. More stories surfaced. Workers injured in Drax's mills and fired instead of treated. Families evicted to make way for his developments. Anyone who challenged him meeting convenient accidents. The federal prosecutor arrived early, took one look at the growing pile of testimony, and ordered Drax's arrest. But Victor Drax wasn't in St. Louis anymore. Word came by telegraph on the 13th day. Drax had disappeared from his mansion 3 days prior. His staff claimed not to know where he'd gone. His business partners expressed shock and concern. His bank accounts had been largely emptied. He was running. "He's coming here," Eliza said when the marshal shared the news. "He won't run without trying to silence me first. The papers I took, as long as they exist, as long as I exist to verify them, he can't fully disappear." "Let him come." The marshal checked his revolver. "I've got 20 deputies sworn in, half the town ready to stand with us, and a federal warrant with his name on it. If he shows his face in Steep Ridge, he'll hang." But Eliza knew better, knew that cornered animals were the most dangerous, knew that Drax had built an empire on making problems disappear, and she was his biggest problem. She was right to worry. They came on the 15th night, and they came smart. Not guns blazing like Webb's crew, not obvious like the fire starters. They came quiet, professional, the kind of killers who made murder look like accident. Eliza woke to the smell of smoke, not wood smoke from the stove, chemical smoke. The boarding house was burning. She grabbed her boots, her coat, the paper she kept under her pillow. Rowan was already at her door, rifle in hand. "Backstairs, now." They ran. Smoke was filling the hallway, thick and black and wrong. Other boarders were screaming, panicking. The front stairs were already engulfed in flames that spread too fast to be natural. Rowan kicked open the back door. Fresh air rushed in, feeding the fire behind them. They stumbled out into the alley, choking, eyes streaming. 3 men were waiting. Rowan shot the first one before he could raise his weapon. The second got a shot off that went wide, hitting the building. Eliza fired at the third, missed, but made him duck behind a water barrel. Then the marshal's men were there, drawn by the gunfire and the flames. The remaining attackers ran. The marshal's deputies chased them into the darkness, while others formed a bucket brigade for the fire. It took an hour to put out the flames. The boarding house was gutted, roof collapsed, walls charred black. Everything Eliza and Rowan owned except what they were wearing and carrying turned to ash. The sour-faced woman who ran it stood in the street crying. Other boarders huddled in blankets, shocked and displaced. 3 people had died, trapped on the upper floor before they could escape. Eliza stood in the street, holding her papers, watching smoke rise into the pre-dawn sky. She was shaking so hard her teeth chattered, not from cold, from rage. "He killed those people because of me," she said. "He killed them because he's a murderer." Rowan's face was black with soot, his eyes hard as stone. "This ends. Today. We're not waiting for prosecutors or trials or justice that might never come. We end this ourselves." "How?" "We give Drax what he wants. We make him think he's won." It took the marshal an hour of arguing before he agreed to the plan. 2 hours more to set it up. By mid-morning, the whole town knew that Eliza Boone was dead. Killed in the boarding house fire, body too badly burned to identify, but confirmed by the papers she'd been carrying, papers that had burned with her. Potter printed it in a special edition. The marshal gave an official statement. Witnesses confirmed seeing her trapped on the upper floor. And Rowan Hale, grieving and broken, announced he was taking her body back up the mountain to bury her where she'd wanted to be laid to rest. It was bait, obvious bait, but the marshal was betting that Drax would take it anyway, because the alternative was accepting that his problems had solved themselves, and men like Drax didn't trust convenient solutions. They were right. Drax showed up in Steep Ridge that very afternoon, traveling under a false name, but recognizable enough that 3 people identified him. He went straight to the marshal's office, pretended to be a concerned businessman checking on reports of violence, asked careful questions about the fire and the casualties. The marshal played his part perfectly, showed Drax the charred remains of papers, clever forgeries Potter had aged with smoke and fire, confirmed that the woman who'd made accusations was among the dead, suggested that perhaps now everyone could move on from this unfortunate business. Drax agreed, expressed his sadness at the loss of life, made a generous donation to help the displaced boarders. Then he left town, heading north, toward the mountain. The marshal's men followed at a distance, keeping him in sight. Rowan was already up there, waiting with Eliza and a dozen armed deputies hidden in the trees around his cabin. Drax arrived at dusk, bringing 5 men with him. Hired guns, professionals like the ones who'd tried to burn them out. They approached the cabin carefully, weapons drawn, expecting trouble. They found Rowan on the porch, digging a grave by lantern light. "Mr. Hale?" Drax's voice was smooth as oil, cultured and careful. "I heard about the tragedy in town. I wanted to pay my respects." Rowan kept digging. "Don't want your respects. Nevertheless, I'm here." Drax dismounted, approached slowly. "The woman you were sheltering, Miss Boone. I understand you were planning to marry her." "Was. I'm truly sorry for your loss. She was troubled. I tried to help her, but she refused treatment." Drax stepped closer to the grave. "I assume this is where you're laying her to rest?" "Seemed fitting. She liked the mountain. May I?" Drax gestured toward the grave. Rowan shrugged, stepped back. Drax looked down into the hole. There was a body there, wrapped in canvas. The right size, the right shape. He stood there for a long moment, and Eliza, watching from inside the cabin through a crack in the shutters, could see him calculating, wondering if it was really her, wondering if his problems were truly solved. Then he pulled out a knife. "I need to be certain," he said, moving toward the wrapped body. That's when Eliza stepped out of the cabin. "Certain of what, Victor?" Drax froze. For 3 seconds, he just stared at her like she was a ghost. Then his face went through a series of changes. Shock, rage, calculation, fear. "You're supposed to be dead." Disappointed? His hired guns were reaching for their weapons, but the marshal's deputies were already emerging from the tree line, rifles raised. A dozen guns pointed at 6 men. "Victor Drax," the marshal called out, "you're under arrest for attempted murder, arson, conspiracy, and about 15 other charges I'll read to you when we get back to town. Drop your weapons." For a moment, it could have gone either way. Drax's men were looking at their boss, waiting for orders. Drax was looking at Eliza with naked hatred. Then he smiled. "Do you really think arresting me will change anything? I have lawyers, Miss Boone. The best lawyers money can buy. I have judges, politicians, lawmen across 3 territories. You have papers that may or may not be forgeries, and the testimony of criminals trying to save their own skins." "Actually," a new voice said, "she has considerably more than that." A man stepped out of the cabin behind Eliza. Mid-40s, well-dressed, carrying a leather case. He had the look of someone who'd spent his life in courtrooms. "Mr. Drax, my name is Thomas Brennan, federal prosecutor. I've spent the last 2 weeks reviewing Miss Boone's evidence and cross-referencing it with federal bank records, land office documents, and testimony from 17 witnesses. I have enough to charge you with fraud, bribery, racketeering, and conspiracy to commit murder. And unlike local courts, federal courts aren't quite so easy to buy." Drax's smile faltered. "Furthermore," Brennan continued, 3 of your former business associates have turned state's evidence in exchange for reduced sentences. They've provided documentation of your activities that corroborates everything in Miss Boone's papers. The case against you is, as they say, ironclad." "You're bluffing, am I?" Brennan opened his case, pulled out a thick folder. "I have deposition transcripts here, bank records, wire transfers, a paper trail that leads directly to you. And starting tomorrow, every newspaper from St. Louis to San Francisco will be printing the story of how Victor Drax built his fortune on the bodies of everyone he destroyed." Drax looked around at the guns pointed at him, at the deputies moving in, at Eliza standing alive and defiant on the porch of a cabin he thought would be her grave. He made one last calculation and came up with an answer he didn't like. "I want my lawyer." "You'll get one, a public defender, since all your assets are being frozen pending trial." The marshal moved forward with shackles. "Victor Drax, you're under arrest." They took him down the mountain in chains. His hired guns went quietly, seeing no profit in dying for a man who couldn't pay them anymore. The deputies led them away in a long, defeated line. Eliza stood on the porch and watched them go, watched Victor Drax disappear into the darkness, and felt something loosen in her chest that had been locked tight for 6 months. "Is it really over?" she asked. "She is," The arrest is over, Brennan said, packing up his papers. The trial will take months. He'll fight every charge, use every legal maneuver he can afford. But yes, Miss Boone, the hard part is over. Now you just have to testify. I'll testify. I'll tell everything. Good. The territory needs to hear it. Other women like you need to hear it. Brennan tipped his hat. You did a brave thing, coming forward. Braver still to stand your ground when he came for you. After he left, it was just Eliza and Rowan on the porch, the mountain quiet around them, the stars bright overhead. What happens now? Rowan asked. I testify. I make sure he hangs. I tell the truth until everyone hears it. Eliza looked at the cabin, at the life Rowan had built here. And then, I don't know. What happens to us? Rowan was quiet for a long time. Then, circuit preacher's coming through in 3 weeks, if you still want to go through with the marriage. Do you? I asked you up here for practical reasons. Partnership. Someone to share the work. He turned to look at her directly. Turns out I got more than I bargained for. Got someone who doesn't quit when things get hard. Someone who stands when it's easier to run. Someone worth fighting beside. That's not a proposal. No, that's a fact. He took her hand, rough calluses against rough calluses, scars touching scars. The proposal is this. Marry me anyway. Not because you need to survive, but because we're better together than apart. Build something here that's ours, not his, not the past's, not fear's, just ours. Eliza looked at their joined hands. Thought about the woman she'd been 6 months ago, desperate, running, powerless. Thought about who she was now, scarred, strong, capable of bringing down an empire. Yes, she said, I'll marry you. Good. Rowan squeezed her hand once, then let go. Now let's fix this grave. Real shame to waste good digging. They filled in the fake grave together, working in comfortable silence while the mountains settled around them. By the time they finished, dawn was breaking over the eastern peaks, painting the snow in shades of gold and rose. Eliza stood looking out at the view, at the valley far below where Steep Ridge lay sleeping, at the mountains marching away to the horizon, at the vast clean sky that held nothing but possibility. She'd run from Drax and his power. Run from a life that would have destroyed her. Run until she couldn't run anymore, and found herself here, on a mountain with a man who valued work over words and truth over convenience. Found herself strong instead of scared. Found herself fighting instead of fleeing. Victor Drax had tried to own her, silence her, erase her. Instead, she'd burned his empire down and walked out of the ashes carrying proof of his crimes. The trial would come. She'd stand in front of judges and lawyers and tell her story without flinching. She'd watch Drax face justice for every person he'd destroyed. But that was tomorrow's battle. Tonight, she was exactly where she chose to be. And for the first time in her life, that choice was completely, irrevocably her own. The trial began on a Tuesday in March, when the snow was finally starting to melt and the roads were passable again. Eliza rode down from the mountain with Rowan, both of them wearing the cleanest clothes they owned, which still looked rough compared to the lawyers and spectators filling the courthouse in Denver. The building was grander than anything in Steep Ridge, 3 stories of stone and glass, with marble floors that echoed when you walked. Eliza felt small walking through those doors, the weight of 100 stairs on her back. Women in fine dresses whispered behind gloved hands. Men in expensive suits looked at her like she was something that had crawled out from under a rock. Let them look. She'd survived worse than judgment. Victor Drax sat at the defense table in a suit that probably cost more than most people made in a year. He'd lost weight during his months in custody. His face looked gaunt, his eyes harder than she remembered. When their gazes met across the courtroom, his expression didn't change, but his hands, folded on the table, tightened until the knuckles went white. The prosecutor, Thomas Brennan, had prepared her for this moment, told her what to expect, how to answer questions, warned her that Drax's lawyers would try to destroy her credibility any way they could. They'll say you're a liar, a thief, a woman scorned, he'd told her the night before. They'll dig into every mistake you've ever made and parade it in front of the jury. The question is, can you stand there and take it without breaking? Eliza had looked at him with eyes that had stared down a mountain winter. I didn't come this far to break now. The first week of trial was all procedure, selecting the jury, opening statements, establishing the basic facts. 12 men sat in judgment, most of them looking uncomfortable with the whole situation. Women didn't testify against powerful men in their world. Women stayed quiet, stayed small, let men handle the important matters. Eliza was about to change their world. When Brennan called her to the stand on the 8th day, the courtroom went silent. Every eye tracked her as she walked to the witness box, placed her hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. Drax's lead attorney was a man named Harrison Wolfe, silver-haired and smooth-voiced, the kind of lawyer who could make a murder sound like an unfortunate misunderstanding. He stood during Brennan's direct examination, objecting to every third question, trying to throw her off rhythm. But Eliza had learned patience on a mountain where impatience killed you. She waded through the objections, answered Brennan's questions clearly and without embellishment. Yes, she'd worked at Drax's textile mill. Yes, he'd singled her out for special attention. Yes, that attention had gradually become a cage. "Can you describe for the jury how Mr. Drax exercised control over your life?" Brennan asked. Eliza looked at the 12 men. "He bought the building where I rented a room, raised everyone else's rent until they had to leave, but kept mine the same. Told me how generous he was being. Then he bought the store where I bought my food. Started giving me credit I didn't ask for, telling the owner to charge everything to his account. When I tried to pay with my own money, the owner said Mr. Drax had insisted. What did you do?" "I tried to find other places to shop. But every store I went to, within a week, Drax had either bought them or made some arrangement. It was like—" She paused, searching for words. "Like watching a net close around you, one strand at a time, so slowly you don't realize you're trapped until you try to move." "Did you ever confront Mr. Drax about this?" "Yes. He said he was taking care of me, said a woman alone in the city needed protection, and he was honored to provide it." Eliza's hands clenched in her lap. "But it wasn't protection, it was ownership." Wolfe stood. "Objection. The witness is characterizing Mr. Drax's intentions without evidence." "Sustained," the judge said. Brennan nodded, changed tactics. "Miss Boone, when did you first become aware of Mr. Drax's criminal activities?" "I overheard a conversation between him and a man I later learned was a city judge. They were discussing a case, a land dispute where Drax wanted a particular ruling. I heard Drax say he'd already made the appropriate arrangements, and the judge laughed and said the payment had been most generous." "What did you do with this information?" "Nothing, at first. I was scared. But I started paying attention, started noticing patterns. Men who challenged Drax in business would suddenly face legal troubles. Women who rejected his advances would find themselves without work. Anyone who stood in his way seemed to meet unfortunate accidents." She testified for 3 hours that day. When Brennan finally said no further questions, Eliza was exhausted but still standing. Then Wolfe approached for cross-examination. "Miss Boone, you've painted quite a dramatic picture of my client, a powerful man systematically destroying everyone who opposes him." Wolfe's smile was sharp. "It's almost like something out of a dime novel, isn't it?" "It's the truth." "Is it? Or is it the story of a woman who stole valuable documents from her employer and now must justify that theft with increasingly outlandish accusations?" "I didn't steal them. I rescued them." "Rescued?" Wolfe's eyebrows went up. "How noble. Tell me, Miss Boone, these documents you rescued, you removed them from Mr. Drax's private study without his knowledge or permission, did you not?" "Yes." "And you took them because you believed they contained evidence of crimes." "I knew they contained evidence." "You knew? Because you're an expert in legal documents? You have training in contract law, banking regulations, criminal statutes?" "No, but—" "So you, a former textile worker with no legal education, decided that documents belonging to a respected businessman were evidence of crimes and took it upon yourself to steal them. Does that sum it up accurately?" Eliza felt heat rising in her face. "He was using those documents to destroy people. I had to try a social justice. You had to steal." "Yes, we've established that." Wolfe turned to the jury. "Miss Boone, isn't it true that you lived in a house Mr. Drax provided, wore clothes he purchased, ate food he paid for?" "He forced those things on me." "Forced? Did he hold a gun to your head?" "No, but did he threaten you with violence if you didn't accept his generosity?" "Not directly, but the implication—" "The implication?" Wolfe's voice dripped with disdain. "So no actual threats? No violence? Just a wealthy man being generous to a woman he cared for, and that woman interpreting kindness as control. It wasn't kindness, wasn't it? Let's talk about the night you left St. Louis. You broke into Mr. Drax's study, stole his private papers, and fled in the night. Would you say that's the action of a rational person? I was saving my life. From what? From a man who had given you employment, housing, security, a man who wanted to marry you? I never agreed to marry him. Wolf pulled out a photograph, showed it to the jury. It depicted Eliza at some society function, wearing an expensive dress, standing next to Drax, who had his arm around her waist. This was taken at a charity gala 6 months before you fled. You're wearing a ring on your left hand, Mr. Drax's ring. You're smiling. Does this look like a woman being held against her will? Eliza stared at the photograph. She remembered that night. Remembered Drax's hand tight on her waist, fingers digging in when she tried to pull away. Remembered smiling because not smiling meant questions she couldn't answer safely. Appearances aren't always truth, she said quietly. No? Then explain this. Wolf produced another document. This is a letter you wrote to Mr. Drax, dated 2 months before you left. You thank him for his continued kindness and generosity. You express deep gratitude for all he's done. You sign it with affection. Does that sound like a woman being controlled? He made me write that letter. After I tried to refuse his gifts, he said I was being ungrateful. Said people were starting to talk about how rude I was being to a man who only wanted to help. I wrote that letter to make him stop pressuring me. How convenient. Whenever evidence contradicts your story, it's because you were forced or pressured. Tell me, Miss Boone, is there any evidence of Mr. Drax's supposed crimes that you didn't steal? Any witness to his actions besides yourself? The men he bribed, the people he hurt, they're witnesses. Men who are testifying to reduce their own sentences? People with every reason to lie? Wolf turned back to the jury. Miss Boone, isn't it possible, just possible, that you fabricated this entire story to justify stealing from a man whose only crime was being generous to you? No. Isn't it possible that you're mentally unstable, as several witnesses have testified? I'm not. Isn't it possible that you created these forgeries yourself, having worked in Mr. Drax's office and having access to his letterhead, his signature, his business documents? They're not forgeries. So you say, but you've already admitted to being a thief. Why should this jury believe anything else you claim? Brennan objected. The judge sustained it, but the damage was done. Eliza could see it in the jurors' faces, doubt creeping in, questions forming. Wolf had made her look like exactly what he wanted, an unstable woman making wild accusations to cover her own crimes. When she finally stepped down from the witness box, her legs were shaking. Rowan was waiting in the gallery, his face carved from stone. He didn't say anything, just handed her a handkerchief for the tears she hadn't realized were falling. I messed up, she whispered. You told the truth. That's all you can do. The trial continued for 3 more weeks. Brennan brought witness after witness. The men Drax had bribed, the families he'd destroyed, experts who testified that the documents were genuine based on paper analysis, ink dating, handwriting comparison. He built a case brick by brick, showing the jury the same pattern Eliza had seen. A man who used money and influence to crush anyone in his way. But Wolf countered every point. The bribed officials were criminals trying to save themselves. The destroyed families were business competitors who'd failed on their own merits. The documents could have been sophisticated forgeries, and the experts couldn't prove otherwise with absolute certainty. It came down to credibility. Who would the jury believe? A powerful, respected businessman? Or a woman who'd admittedly stolen from him? On the final day of testimony, Brennan made a decision that surprised everyone. He called Victor Drax to the stand. It was a risk. Drax was smooth, prepared, protected by lawyers who'd coached him on every possible question. But Brennan was betting that under pressure, even the best liar would crack. Drax took the stand with confidence, answering Wolf's friendly questions with practiced ease. Yes, he'd been generous to Miss Boone. Yes, he'd hoped to marry her. No, he'd never threatened her, never controlled her, never done anything but try to help a troubled young woman. Miss Boone has made some serious accusations about your business practices, Wolf said. How do you respond to claims that you bribe judges and officials? With sadness, Drax said smoothly. I've built my business on integrity and hard work. To hear it slandered this way by a woman I tried to help is deeply painful. Have you ever paid anyone to influence a legal proceeding? Never. Have you ever arranged for someone to be harmed? Absolutely not. Wolf sat down, satisfied. Then Brennan stood for cross-examination.
Mr. Drax, you testified that you never threatened Miss Boone, is that correct?
That's correct. Never implied that refusing your generosity would have consequences? Never. Brennan pulled out a letter, showed it to Drax. Do you recognize this? Drax barely glanced at it. It appears to be a letter from my office. Read it, please, out loud for the jury. Drax's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. He read, Dear Miss Boone, I was disappointed to hear you've been making inquiries about alternative lodging. As you know, the building where you currently reside is one of my properties. I would hate for any complications to arise regarding your tenancy. I trust you'll reconsider this unnecessary change. With regards, Victor Drax. That sounds like a threat, Mr. Drax. It's a landlord expressing concern about a tenant. Interesting. Because 2 days after you sent that letter, every other tenant in that building was evicted. Everyone except Miss Boone. Would you call that a coincidence? I don't recall the specifics. You don't recall evicting an entire building? That seems like a memorable event. Brennan pulled out another document. How about this letter sent to Henry Morrison, a merchant who employed Miss Boone briefly? Drax's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Brennan read it himself. Mr. Morrison, I understand you've recently hired a Miss Eliza Boone. While I appreciate your entrepreneurial spirit, I feel compelled to inform you that Miss Boone has been under my personal care due to certain instabilities. For her safety and yours, I'd recommend reconsidering her employment. I'm prepared to compensate you for any inconvenience this causes. Victor Drax. That's just concern for her welfare. Is it? Because Morrison testified yesterday that you threatened to buy his store and close it if he didn't fire Miss Boone. Was he lying? He must have misunderstood. Like the 3 other merchants who received similar letters? Like the landlord who was told your friendship with Miss Boone should be respected? All of them misunderstood? Brennan's voice was rising now, controlled but intense. Mr. Drax, you systematically isolated Miss Boone from employment, housing, and social connections. You created a situation where she was dependent on you for everything. That's not generosity, that's coercion. I was trying to protect her. From what? From freedom? From making her own choices? Brennan slammed a hand on the witness box rail. You constructed a cage around that woman and called it kindness. And when she escaped and took evidence of your crimes, you sent armed men to drag her back. You burned down a building trying to kill her. You've spent 6 months trying to silence her because she knows the truth about what you are. That's a lie! Is it? Brennan pulled out the photograph that had been found on Marcus Webb when he was arrested. A picture of Eliza with handwriting on the back. Retrieve or eliminate, no witnesses. That's your handwriting, isn't it, Mr. Drax? Drax stared at the photograph. For the first time, his mask slipped. You can't prove. I don't have to prove you wrote it. Webb already testified that you gave him that photograph with those exact instructions. Retrieve Eliza Boone or kill her, and make sure no one could testify against you. Brennan faced the jury. That's not the action of an innocent man. That's the action of someone desperate to hide his crimes. I want my lawyer, Drax said, his voice tight. You have one. He's sitting right there. But he can't save you from the truth, Mr. Drax. The documents are real. The witnesses are real. The pattern of intimidation, bribery, and violence is real. And Miss Boone, the woman you tried so hard to control and silence, is real. She's alive, she's testifying, and she's bringing your empire down. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Eliza spent that time in a small room off the courthouse, unable to eat, unable to sit still. Rowan sat in the corner, cleaning his rifle, even though he couldn't bring it into the courtroom, just needing something for his hands to do. What if they don't believe me? Eliza said for the 10th time. Then we deal with it. He'll go free, he'll come after me again. Then I'll shoot him. Rowan said it calmly, like discussing the weather. One way or another, this ends today. When the jury finally returned, the foreman looked tired. 12 men who'd spent 6 hours arguing about truth and credibility and whether a woman's testimony could be trusted against a man's money. The judge asked for the verdict. On the charge of bribery, we find the defendant guilty. Eliza's hands clenched on the table. On the charge of fraud, guilty. On conspiracy to commit murder, guilty. On attempted murder, guilty. With each word, Drax's face went paler. His lawyers were already whispering to him, probably planning appeals, but it didn't matter. The jury had spoken. Guilty on all counts. The judge set sentencing for the following week, but everyone knew what it would be. Men like Drax, convicted of crimes like these, faced decades in prison if they were lucky, hanging if they weren't. Eliza walked out of that courthouse into spring sunshine, and for the first time in a year she could breathe all the way down to the bottom of her lungs. Potter was waiting with his notebook, already writing the story that would be in every newspaper from Denver to San Francisco by week's end. Other reporters swarmed, shouting questions. Eliza ignored them all, walked straight to where Rowan stood holding their horses. "It's over," she said. "Not quite." He handed her the reins. "Still got a preacher waiting up the mountain." They were married 3 days later in the cabin that had become their home. The circuit preacher performed the ceremony, with the marshal and Potter as witnesses. Eliza wore a dress she'd sewn herself from fabric bought with money she'd earned giving testimony, simple, practical, warm enough for mountain life. Rowan wore clean clothes and looked uncomfortable in them. He said his vows in the same flat tone he used for everything, but his hand was steady when he put the ring on her finger, a simple gold band he'd hammered out himself, not fancy, but solid. "Do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." "Do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Eliza looked at Rowan, scarred, quiet, harder than the mountain he lived on, but capable of gentleness when it mattered. A man who'd fought beside her, trusted her, treated her like an equal when the whole world wanted her to be small. "I do." They were married, just like that. No romance, no poetry, just two people choosing to build something together. The preacher left. The marshal and Potter rode down after sharing a meal of venison stew and hard bread. And then it was just Eliza and Rowan, alone on their mountain, married and facing the future. "So," Rowan said, clearing the dinner dishes, "what now?" Eliza looked around the cabin, small, rough, exactly the right size for two people who didn't need much beyond each other and honest work. "Now we live. We work. We survive another winter." "That's not much of a plan." "It's enough." She moved to the window, looked out at the peaks still wearing snow, at the valley far below where lights were starting to wink on as evening came. 6 months ago, I was running from a man who thought he owned me. Now I'm standing in a place I helped build, married to a man who treats me like a partner, and the man who tried to destroy me is in prison waiting to hang. You destroyed him right back. No? Eliza turned from the window. I just told the truth. He destroyed himself. That night, lying in the bed they now shared, awkwardly at first, both of them unused to another person's warmth, Eliza thought about all the versions of herself she'd been. The mill worker who kept her head down and tried to be invisible. The object of Drax's obsession, watching her life shrink until there was nothing left but his control. The thief who stole evidence and ran. The bride who climbed a mountain to marry a stranger. The woman who learned to shoot, to chop wood, to survive cold that could kill. The witness who stood in a courtroom and refused to be silenced. She'd been broken and rebuilt so many times she'd lost count. But each breaking had made her stronger. Each rebuilding had made her more herself. You awake? Rowan's voice in the darkness. Yeah. I'm glad you hit Cal Brennan that day. In the street. Eliza smiled in the dark. Why? Because it told me you still had fight in you. Woman with fight will survive a mountain. Woman without it. He was quiet for a moment. I couldn't have saved you if you wouldn't save yourself. You did save me, though. Gave me a place to run to. Taught me how to survive. Stood with me when Drax came. That wasn't saving. That was partnership. His hand found hers in the darkness. You saved yourself, Eliza. I just happened to be there. She thought about that. About agency and choice, and how survival sometimes looked like accepting help, but only worked if you did the hard parts yourself. We saved each other, she said finally. You were running from grief. I was running from control. We both ended up here building something new out of what we had left. That work for you? Yeah, it works. Spring turned to summer. Eliza and Rowan worked the homestead together. expanding the garden, repairing the lean-to, building a better storage shed. She got stronger, more capable. Could split a cord of wood in an afternoon now, could shoot well enough to bring down a deer at 100 yards, could read the weather as well as Rowan. The mountain was still hard, still dangerous, but it was theirs. News came from Denver in June. Drax had been sentenced to life imprisonment, avoiding the noose through some last-minute legal maneuvering his lawyers managed. He'd spend the rest of his days in a federal prison, his fortune seized to compensate his victims, his name synonymous with corruption. "Should have hanged him," Rowan said when Potter brought them the newspaper. "He's in a cage for the rest of his life," Eliza said. "That's punishment enough. He spent so long putting other people in cages, now he knows what it feels like." Women started writing to her. Letters arrived via Potter or the Marshal, forwarded from newspapers that had printed her story. Women who'd been controlled, manipulated, made to feel powerless by men with money or influence, or just the weight of society behind them. They thanked her for speaking up, told their own stories, asked for advice. Eliza answered every letter, told them what she'd learned, that running wasn't cowardice, it was survival. That stealing evidence of crimes wasn't theft, it was justice. That speaking truth was terrifying but necessary. That you could lose everything and still have yourself, and yourself was enough to build on. Some of the women took her advice, left bad situations, reported crimes, stood up for themselves. Some didn't. Fear was powerful, and Eliza understood that. But at least they knew someone had done it and survived. At least they knew it was possible. By autumn, Eliza had turned one corner of the cabin into a writing desk. She was working with Potter on a longer piece, not just her story, but a broader look at how men like Drax operated, how systems of power protected them, how those systems could be challenged. "You're turning into a crusader," Rowan observed one evening, watching her write by lamplight. "Is that a problem?" "No, just different from the woman who showed up here last year, half dead and ready to disappear." "That woman learned something on this mountain." Eliza set down her pen. "Learned that disappearing doesn't solve problems. Standing your ground does, fighting does, truth does." "Mountain didn't teach you that. You already knew it, just had to remember." Maybe he was right. Maybe the strength had always been there, buried under fear and survival instinct. Maybe the mountain just gave her space to find it again. Winter came around once more. This time, Eliza was ready for it. Had supplies stocked, wood cut, knew every trick for staying warm and fed when the storms hit. She and Rowan weathered it together, two people who'd learned to work as one, to read each other's silences, to trust without needing words. It was still hard, still brutal, still the kind of winter that killed the unprepared. But Eliza wasn't unprepared anymore. On a clear day in February, after the worst of the storms had passed, they stood on the ridge above the cabin and looked out at the view. Miles of snow-covered peaks, the valley far below, the vast, clean sky stretching forever. "You ever regret it?" Rowan asked. "Coming up here? Marrying me? Could have gone anywhere after the trial. Done anything." Eliza thought about it honestly. Thought about the life she could have had in a city somewhere, using her notoriety to build a different kind of future. Thought about the comfort, the society, the ease of a life that didn't involve hauling water and chopping wood. "No," she said, "this is exactly where I'm supposed to be." Why? Because this mountain doesn't care who I was. Doesn't care about Drax or the trial or my past. It only cares about whether I can survive it. She turned to look at him. "And I can. We can. That's worth more than any easy life in a city where people would always see me as Victor Drax's victim first and myself second." "You're not his victim." "No, I'm not. I'm the woman who brought him down, who stood in front of 12 men and told the truth until they believed it, who learned to survive a mountain that tries to kill you just for being there." She looked back at the view. "I'm the woman who chose her own life instead of accepting the one someone else wanted to give me. That's who I am now." Rowan nodded slowly. "Good, because that's who I married." They stood there in the cold clarity, two scarred people who'd found each other at the end of the world and decided that was enough. Not perfect, not easy, but real, and chosen, and theirs. Below them, smoke rose from the cabin chimney, a sign of life in the wilderness, a home they'd built together from work and trust, and the kind of partnership that only came from surviving hard things side by side. Eliza had run from one life and climbed to another, had been broken and rebuilt. had learned that strength wasn't about never being afraid. It was about being afraid and doing what needed doing anyway. She'd set out to escape Victor Drax and ended up finding herself. Found that she was capable of more than she'd ever imagined. Found that power didn't come from money or influence or control over others. It came from knowing yourself, standing your ground, refusing to let anyone make you small. The mountain had tested her. Winter had tested her. The trial had tested her. She'd passed every test, not because she was perfect, not because she never made mistakes or never felt fear or never wanted to quit, but because she'd learned something that Drax, with all his money and power, had never understood. You can't own a person who knows their own worth. You can't cage someone who's tasted real freedom. You can't silence a voice that's learned to speak truth without apology. Eliza Boone had arrived on this mountain as a woman running from her past. She'd leave it, if she ever left at all, as a woman who'd claimed her future with both hands and refused to let go. And that, she thought, looking out at the peaks that had tested her and the valley that had judged her, and the sky that promised nothing but possibility, was the only victory that mattered. Not perfect, not easy, but completely, irrevocably hers.